Evan Mercer sat in a dark alley, his back pressed against a cold brick wall, while the smell of damp concrete and cigarette smoke settled in his lungs. His clothes were wet, and the night air bit into him, but he forced himself to stay still. One breath at a time. Panicking wouldn't help. The last thing he remembered, he'd been working a late shift at the data center. Monitors glowing, server fans humming, nothing unusual. Then the surge hit. Blue lightning exploded across the room and slammed into him before he could react. The pain hadn't been normal pain. His mind had torn apart, scattered into raw energy, lost in a place that wasn't quite nothing, but wasn't existence either. And now, he was here. His brain ran through the possibilities. Dream? No, the detail was too sharp. Dead? If so, the afterlife looked like a run-down part of town. Transported? That felt closest to the truth. He pushed himself up. No pain. No burns. His body felt perfectly normal. The city around him didn't. The buildings looked old-fashioned, the cars boxy and chrome-heavy, straight out of mid-century documentary. His stomach tightened. He needed confirmation. A newspaper stand sat on the corner. Evan walked over, lifted the top paper, and froze as he read the date. February 7th, 1963, President Kennedy addresses mutant concerns. Mutants. His mind clicked the pieces together. Marvel. He was a marvel. Before he could process the scale of that, a sharp chime echoed inside his head. A blue screen appeared in front of him, floating in the air. System initialization complete. Welcome, user, Evan Mercer. Passive evolution system online. Evan's breath caught. A system. More text followed. System overview. Passive evolution. The user evolves automatically over time. Any passive ability acquired will be added to the system and can be trained freely. World travel system. Locked until higher evolution is reached. Not a cheat that gave him powers out of nowhere. This system evolved what he already had, which right now was nothing. His expression darkened. If he wanted power, he'd have to get an ability first. Only then would the system take over. That meant priority number one, obtain a passive mutation. But first, he needed shelter. He checked his pockets. Empty, no money, no ID. He scanned the street until he spotted a drunk man stumbling out of a bar, wallet hanging halfway out of his coat. Evan didn't hesitate. One smooth motion later, the wallet was in his hand and the man was none the wiser. In the alley, Evan flipped it open. A license, a few bills, and an address. 1182 Westbrook Avenue, New York City. A place to start. Navigating the city wasn't hard. He moved like someone who belonged, kept his head down, didn't draw attention. 20 minutes later, he stood outside a modest apartment building. Not fancy, but intact. The stolen key worked. Inside was a cramped room, a bed, a radio, a cluttered desk, clothes that fit. Enough. He locked the door and finally let himself breathe. Time to take stock. Status. The system responded instantly. User status. Evan Mercer. Age, 23. Mutant ability, none. Passive abilities, none. Evan stared at the screen. The system wasn't giving him anything free. It would help him grow, but only after he secured a mutation to build on. Options flashed through his mind. Black market experiments, hidden mutant networks, illegal research labs. But before any of that, he needed information. He tuned the radio. Static crackled, then a steady voice came through. Tension continues to rise as more mutant incidents are reported across the country. Professor Charles Xavier has urged for peaceful negotiation, while government officials debate further action. Evan leaned back in the creaky chair and listened. The world was shifting, and so would he. He wasn't some unlucky bystander dropped into a dangerous timeline. With passive evolution, he could become something else entirely. He wouldn't just survive this world. He would rise with it. Evan sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the apartment he had taken over, elbows on his knees, fingers loosely folded as he stared at the floor. The room was quiet except for the occasional car rolling past outside, but his mind was anything but calm. One night, one sleep, and everything had changed. The world felt slower, more organized, as if every piece of reality had shifted into focus. When he first activated the passive evolution system, it had scanned him for any innate traits, but he'd had none. No mutations, no enhanced biology. Just a human body and an ordinary mind. That was enough. The system had seized on the only thing it could evolve, his cognition. That was how he unlocked his first passive skill. Passive skill unlocked. Enhanced neural processing. Level 1, Level 2, progress 100%. At first it felt minor, slightly sharper focus, cleaner memory. But after one night, Level 2 had rewritten everything. Enhanced neural processing. 5 evolutionary stages. Level 1. Increased information retention. Improved memory, better mental organization, steadier emotions and stress. Level 2. Accelerated cognitive processing, unlocked overnight. Thought speed increased 5-fold. Mental fatigue, drastically reduced. Emotional reactions automatically regulated. Level 3. Multi-layered thinking, EST unlock. 1 week. Simultaneous, complex thoughts. Strong predictive reasoning. Resistance to psychic interference. Level 4. Hyperlogical analysis, EST unlock. 1 month. Perfect information recall. Deep strategic foresight. Subtle speech manipulation. Level 5. Limitless intelligence, EST unlock. 1 year. No mental fatigue. Instant mastery of logical subjects. True hyper-awareness. The immediate changes. Evan rolled a coin between his fingers, studying the subtle shifts in his perception. Everything was faster. A glance at the clock told him more than the time. His mind instantly calculated how many seconds had passed since he last looked down to the millisecond. Thoughts no longer stumbled or paused. They connected like a flowing river, branching into conclusions at impossible speed. Every detail from the previous day sat neatly stored, ready to be recalled without effort. He felt sharper, lighter, completely in control. A test, the coin flip. Evan flicked the coin upward. The world didn't slow down. His mind sped up. He saw each rotation, the glint of light along the metal, the exact arc it followed. A dozen calculations ran in his head at once. Before it finished falling, his hand snapped up and caught it cleanly. Not reflex. Prediction. The emotional firewall. He still felt emotions, but they no longer dictated anything. Annoyance dimmed before it could take hold. Fear translated directly into calculation. Surprise became analysis. Not detachment, optimization. He wasn't becoming a machine. He still wanted, still cared, still had ambition. But nothing would ever cloud his judgment again. Drawbacks. The upgrade wasn't perfect. Information overload. He noticed everything. Too much. Boredom. Conversations already felt predictable. Sleep issues. His mind refused to stop processing. Manageable, all of it. And this was only level 2. Evan stood, stretching his shoulders as the next issue rose to the front of his mind. He didn't exist here. No legal identity meant no bank account, no housing, and too much risk. He had 2 options. Forge an identity, or find someone who could do it for him. Forging was too risky for now. He needed a network, someone with access to black market documents. And in 1963 New York, there was only one type of place to find those people. Underground clubs. His eyes moved to the wallet he'd taken from Michael Carter. Inside it, a membership card. The Black Oak Club. Money, influence, secrets, and crime flowed through places like that. Exactly what he needed. Evan slipped the wallet into his pocket and headed for the door, a faint smile touching his lips. It was time to pay the club a visit.
Hey everyone, welcome to FanFic Canon. Thanks for hitting play. I'm thrilled to bring this fan-made story to life for you. If you enjoy the ride and want more narrated fanfics, smash, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want audiobook of a novel of your choice, join my Patreon. Request any title that's freely available online, and I'll produce a full narration just for you. Now, let's dive into today's adventure.
Evan Mercer was a man without a name, without a past, and without a future, at least in the eyes of this world. That had to change. He had woken up in 1963, a time of power, paranoia, and secrets, where having the right identity meant the difference between blending in and being erased. The wallet in his pocket belonged to Michael Carter, a gambler and drunk, a man unimportant enough that his disappearance wouldn't send alarm bells ringing. That made him the perfect cover, temporary, disposable. Inside that wallet was more than just money. It held a key and an address. Evan had used it to walk straight into Michael Carter's apartment, where he had spent the last few days analyzing, planning, and preparing. The landlord hadn't stopped him. No one cared. That was the beauty of 1963. Confidence was verification. But he knew he couldn't stay there forever. Michael Carter had debts, bad habits, and an identity that would crumble under scrutiny. Evan needed something real, a name that would stand up to government records, banks, and future investigations. For that, he needed money. And for money, he needed a place where wealth flowed without consequence. That place? The Black Oak Club. The club catered to high-stakes gamblers, criminals, and men with too much money and not enough self-control. It was a hub of power and, most importantly, a place where questions weren't asked if you had the right credentials. Michael Carter had a membership card, and tonight, Evan Mercer would wear his skin. But there was a problem. Evan didn't look exactly like Michael Carter. Not enough for someone who knew him well to be fooled. The two men shared some general similarities. Both had dark hair, were of similar height, and had an average build. That was just enough for casual acquaintances to overlook details, especially in dim lighting. But the doorman? He had recognized Carter instantly. That meant Evan had to think fast. Walking up to the entrance, he barely paused before showing the card to the doorman, a large man with a permanent scowl. The man squinted at him, then at the card. "Carter, huh? Thought you drank yourself to death last week." Evan didn't react. No hesitation, no twitch, no sign of discomfort. A weak liar would deny or try to explain. A smart one? They leaned into the assumption. Rumors of my demise were exaggerated. The doorman exhaled through his nose, clearly used to dealing with drunkards who disappeared for days. "Figures," the man muttered. "Get inside before someone takes your seat." He stepped aside. Evan walked in as if he belonged. Inside, the smell of money, smoke, and alcohol filled the air. The room was a mix of red velvet, polished wood, and golden chandeliers, with men in tailored suits sitting at round tables, betting away small fortunes. Gambling was the soul of this place, and it was his next step. He had only $20 in his pocket. A joke in a place like this. But he wasn't planning on leaving with just $20. He sat at a high-stakes poker table, rolling his shoulders, surveying the table like a battlefield. The dealer, a grizzled man with shark-like eyes, raised an eyebrow. "New to the table? Just visiting," Evan replied smoothly. The buy-in was $100, but he only had $20. He placed the money down, meeting the dealer's gaze. "Give me 2 hands. If I don't double it, I'll walk." The men at the table chuckled. Someone muttered, "Another idiot." But Evan wasn't here for luck. He had something better, a mind built to win. His enhanced neural processing had already kicked in, breaking down everything at an impossible speed. He tracked the card distribution with mathematical precision. He analyzed each player's betting habits, their micro-expressions, their breathing. He saw patterns in how they played, who bluffed, who hesitated, who was overconfident. The first hand? He won with minimal effort. The second? He baited a middle-aged businessman with shaking fingers into overcommitting. The man had a weak hand, but an aggressive bluff. Evan played into it, let him feel safe, then crushed him. In 10 minutes, his $20 turned into $200. In 1 hour, it became $2,500. Enough to buy what he needed. Winning was easy. Finding the right man? That was the real challenge. He scanned the room, filtering through potential contacts. Some men were too loud, bragging, boasting, useless. Some were too dangerous. Loan sharks, enforcers. They wouldn't sell a clean identity. Then he saw him, a quiet man in the corner, sipping whiskey, listening rather than talking. Not gambling, just watching. He fit the profile perfectly. Someone who brokered deals rather than played in them. Evan approached and sat down without invitation. The man didn't look surprised. "You're bold, kid," he said, voice smooth. "I'm smart. Evan countered. The man smirked. What do you need? A name, Evan replied. A clean one. The man leaned back, studying him. That's expensive. Evan placed $2,000 on the table. The man barely glanced at it. And Evan smiled slightly. And I can tell you which of the men in this room will be bankrupt in 6 months. Now he had the man's attention. You a psychic? The man asked, amused. Better. Evan nodded toward a well-dressed businessman at the bar. That guy? Betting too hard, compensating. He's either diverting company funds or already in debt. He'll be gone in 4 months. The man raised an eyebrow. Evan continued. The guy at the far table? He keeps checking his watch. Twice in the last 2 minutes. He's waiting for someone. Nervous. That means a side deal, something illegal. The man was now fully engaged. Evan leaned in. Give me an ID, and I'll keep feeding you insights. People lie, but numbers? Patterns? They don't. A slow grin spread across the man's face. I like you, kid. He took the money and pocketed it. Come back in 2 days. You'll have your identity. He extended a hand. Name's Vincent Costa. Evan shook it. Evan Mercer, he said smoothly. At least I will be in 2 days. 2 days later, Evan received a birth certificate, a social security number, a driver's license under the name Evan Mercer, a bank account. For all legal purposes, Evan Mercer had always existed. He had a clean record, a verifiable past, and best of all, no loose ends. Evan sat in his new apartment, flipping his newly acquired ID card between his fingers. He had money. He had name, but he still had no abilities. The system wouldn't evolve nothing. If he wanted to use passive evolution, he needed something to evolve, which meant it was time to find mutants. His next step? Finding the first mutation that would set his evolution into motion. And he already had a target. A week had passed since Evan Mercer secured his identity, money, and place in this world. The world still moved at the same pace, but his mind, his enhanced neural processing had reached level 3. Passive skill, enhanced neural processing. Level 3 unlocked, multi-layered thinking, simultaneous thought processing, ability to analyze multiple complex ideas at the same time. Predictive reasoning, can anticipate outcomes based on probabilities with higher accuracy. Mental resistance, stronger resistance to psychic or emotional manipulation. The difference was immediate. Where before he had to consciously analyze patterns, his brain now did it automatically. He no longer just saw the present. He saw possibilities. People weren't just individuals anymore. They were nodes in a massive web of interactions. Every conversation, every move they made, every hesitation fed into a constantly updating model. And right now, that model told him he needed power. Not just wealth, not just influence. Power over biology itself. Because the passive evolution system required something to evolve. And that meant he needed a way to incorporate mutant abilities into his body. He had spent the last week researching, and now he had a plan. He would build a biotech company. Not just any company, a front for genetic research. A place where he could experiment, study, and refine the process of incorporating mutant DNA into his own. To the world, it would be a legitimate medical firm. To Evan, it would be his path to ascension. But to do that, he needed 2 things, a foundation and a face. Evan was a mastermind, not frontman. He needed someone else to be the public face of his company. And fate? Fate delivered that person to him in the form of a mutant woman running for her life. Evan walked through the streets of New York, his mind working through logistics, market strategies, and investment loopholes to set up his company without exposing his real goals. Then he heard it. A woman scream. Not the kind of scream from a mugging. Not a panicked, lost in the dark kind of scream. A scream of terror. His brain instantly processed possibilities. Too late for a robbery. The scream was moving, not a single location, meaning a chase. Heavy footsteps behind it. Multiple pursuers. He turned the corner into an alleyway and saw her. A woman, mid-20s, disheveled and bleeding, backing away from 3 men in dark suits. She wasn't just any woman. She was Amelia Vaught, a mutant who, years from now, would stand among Magneto's allies. But right now, she was just a mutant with nowhere to go. Evan knew the signs. The way her body flickered into mist, the way she looked at them with desperation, not just fear. She had power, but she didn't know how to control it. The men closed in. One of them spoke. "You shouldn't have run, sweetheart. Just come quietly, and this won't get worse." Her form blurred, like she was about to turn into mist. Then she collapsed against the wall, exhausted. She was weak, overusing her power. She was exactly the kind of person Evan needed. Evan moved. Before the men could react, he grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and swung. The nearest thug barely had time to turn before Evan's strike connected against his temple. A clean knockout. The second man reached into his coat. A gun. Evan had already anticipated it. He kicked the barrel before the shot fired, twisted the man's wrist, and drove his knee into the thug's ribs. The third man took one look at his fallen companions and ran. Evan let him go. Let him report back to whoever sent them. He turned his attention to Amelia, who was staring at him, wide-eyed. You help me?" she said, still breathing hard. Evan studied her. Red hair, piercing eyes, a look of someone who had been betrayed before. She was hesitant to trust. Good. It meant she was cautious, which meant she was useful. "You were outnumbered," Evan said simply, wiping blood off his hand. "I don't like unfair fights." She blinked, still trying to process. "Who are you?" Evan smiled slightly. "A businessman," he said, "and I have an offer for you." Her name was Amelia Vaught. She had been on the run for months. Her mutation had manifested in her teenage years, an ability to turn her body into mist, making her nearly untouchable. A corporation, Essex Corp, had found out about her and tried to take her in for research. She escaped. Barely. Now, they were hunting her. And Evan? Evan saw an opportunity. He took her to his apartment, gave her food, bandages, and time to calm down. Then, he laid out his offer. "You're alone," Evan said. "You don't trust anyone. You can't live a normal life, and you can't run forever." Amelia looked away, jaw tight. "I don't have a choice." "You do now," Evan countered. "Work with me." She frowned. "Doing what?" "Building something," Evan said simply. "A company. A biotech firm. You'll be the public face, the CEO. I'll handle everything else." Amelia gave a dry laugh. "You want a mutant as your CEO?" Evan leaned forward. "I want someone who understands the stakes. Someone with a reason to succeed. Someone who doesn't just follow the system, but knows how to survive outside it." She hesitated. "And what do you get?" Evan's smirk was small, but calculated. "A corporation gives me resources, access, and legitimacy. It lets me operate on a level that money alone can't buy." She narrowed her eyes. "You're hiding something." Evan nodded. "Of course I am." A long pause. Then finally, "Fine," she said. "I'm in." Evan nodded, satisfied. The first piece of his empire was in place. Now, it was time to make it real. Evan Mercer sat in his apartment, legs crossed, eyes sharp as he went over the final details in his mind. His enhanced neural processing had already laid out the entire framework of what he needed to do next. A biotech company, a front for genetic research, a place where he could study, experiment, and ultimately integrate mutant DNA into his own body. Amelia Vaught sat across from him, still wary, still cautious. She didn't fully trust him yet. That was fine. She would. "You've been thinking about something for the past 20 minutes, she said, watching him. "I don't like it." Evan smirked slightly, setting down his cup of coffee. "Good instincts. You're right. I'm planning something, and you're going to be part of it." She narrowed her eyes. "If this is about your so-called biotech company, you still haven't convinced me why I should help." Evan leaned forward. "Because it benefits you more than anyone else." She scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" Evan clasped his hands together, voice calm but commanding. "What's your long-term plan, Amelia? Keep running forever? Hiding from Essex Corp? Hoping Magneto's people don't force you into their little war?" Her jaw tightened at the mention of Magneto. "You think they won't come looking for you? You were a nurse, weren't you? You've seen what happens to mutants who don't have power, who don't have protection." She remained silent. Evan continued. "But if you work with me, you're no longer a runaway mutant. You're the CEO of a multinational biotech company, a powerful, public figure. No one can take you without making it a global incident. Her fingers clenched into fists. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. She had been hunted for too long. She had no allies, no real future. This wasn't just survival. This was a way to fight back. She exhaled slowly. Let's say I agree. How do you plan to start a biotech company overnight? Investors don't just throw money at ideas without proof. Evan smiled. I already know the right people. All they need is the right incentive. Amelia frowned. Who? The people who fund projects that can't exist on public records, Evan replied. Black budget investors. Wealthy men who need places to put their money where the government can't track it. People who have no problem investing in biotech, provided they can benefit from it. Amelia gave him a skeptical look. And how exactly do you have those connections? Evan leaned back. That's where you're underestimating me. 3 days later, Evan was sitting inside one of New York's most exclusive private lounges. He had spent the last few days gathering information, making the right calls, and ensuring he got the meeting he needed. These weren't ordinary businessmen. These were men with deep connections to military contracts, secret projects, and industries that had more power than the government itself. The kind of men who had funded genetic experiments, black ops research, and human enhancement projects before the world even knew about mutants. The old guard. Across from him sat Howard Vance, a Wall Street kingmaker who had ties to covert research groups. To his right was Victor Langley, a real estate mogul who had funneled money into experimental science divisions. The last man, Conrad Holt, had once been an advisor to several government think tanks on biological warfare. These men had funded projects before. They just needed the right sales pitch. Vance stared at Evan, unimpressed. You have 2 minutes to impress me, kid. Talk. Evan met his gaze without blinking. Biotech is the next trillion-dollar industry. Not pharmaceuticals, not oil, not technology, genetics. Vance raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. In 10 years, every major government will be investing in genetic research. Disease resistance, enhanced immunity, organ regeneration. These aren't theories anymore. The Soviet Union, China, and even certain U.S. groups are already developing classified projects to push human biology to the next level. Langley adjusted his tie. You're speaking in broad strokes. What do you have that makes you different? Evan leaned in slightly. Because my company won't be limited by government oversight. No ethics committees, no bureaucratic red tape. We'll be at the cutting edge of genetics, because we won't be restrained by outdated policies. Vance narrowed his eyes. And what exactly is your company planning to research? Evan smirked. A method to integrate enhanced genes into human biology without rejection. For the first time, all 3 men actually looked interested. Holt, the former government advisor, finally spoke. You're talking about controlled genetic augmentation. Evan nodded. Exactly. Every attempt at biological enhancement so far has failed because the human body rejects foreign modifications. What if I told you I had a method to fix that? Langley leaned back, considering. You're asking us to invest in an unproven project. Why should we believe you have the method to make it work? Evan's smirk deepened. Because I've already tested the preliminary theory. That was a lie, but they didn't know that. Vance stared at him for a long moment, then chuckled. You're a dangerous little bastard, aren't you? Evan remained silent, waiting. Vance turned to his colleagues. I like him. He's ambitious. He knows how the game is played. He turned back to Evan. How much do you need? Evan barely blinked. 10 million to start. Langley raised an eyebrow. That's a bold ask. Bold investments bring bold returns, Evan replied smoothly. A slow smirk crept onto Vance's face. Done. You'll have the money in a week. Evan extended his hand. Vance shook it. The deal was made. 1 week later, Mercer Biotech was officially registered. A legitimate biotech firm on paper, focused on cutting-edge genetic research. The real goal? To study and integrate mutant DNA into the human genome. Evan handled the business, negotiations, and hidden operations. Amelia handled the public image, investors, and media presence. They worked seamlessly. At first, Amelia was skeptical, but after watching Evan manipulate billionaires, dismantle competitors, and control entire rooms with his words, she began to see him differently. This wasn't just a man trying to survive. This was a man building something unstoppable. One night, after a long strategy meeting, Amelia leaned against Evan's desk, arms crossed. "You're dangerous," she muttered, staring at him. Evan glanced up from his paperwork. "That's not a complaint." She smirked. "No, it's a warning." Evan stood, moving toward her. "You're still trying to figure me out." She tilted her head slightly. "I don't trust people easily." "Good," Evan said. "Trust is earned." Silence stretched between them. Something unspoken passed in the air. For the first time, Amelia saw him not just as a strategist, not just as a businessman, but as a man. He was calm, controlled, and yet undeniably compelling. She looked away. "We should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Evan smirked. "Of course." She left the room. Evan watched her go, already knowing she was falling into his orbit. It was only a matter of time. Mercer Biotech was now officially operational. Evan had funding, legitimacy, and a growing influence. But now, the real work began. Essex Corp wouldn't sit still. Someone would come looking for Amelia. And Evan? Evan was waiting. Evan Mercer sat in his dimly lit office at Mercer Biotech, the glow from multiple computer screens casting sharp shadows across his face. His mind raced, processing the culmination of weeks of research and planning. He had finally found the key to his next stage of evolution, and it all came down to one name, Armando Munoz, also known as Darwin. Darwin's mutation had always fascinated Evan. Reactive evolution, the ability to instantly adapt to any threat or environment, was on paper one of the most powerful abilities in existence. A perfect form of survival. But Evan knew better. Darwin had died because his power wasn't truly perfect. He could only adapt to one danger at a time. If he was evolving to survive one thing, it left him vulnerable to another. That limitation was why he failed. Evan would not fail. He had no intention of telling anyone how he would integrate Darwin's mutation or why it would work for him and not others. He simply needed to obtain the genetic material and move forward. As he pondered his next move, the door to his office creaked open, and Amelia Vaught stepped inside. "You're burning the midnight oil again," she remarked, folding her arms. "What's got you so engrossed?" Evan leaned back, his fingers steepled. "I've been delving into the fate of a particular mutant, Armando Munoz, also known as Darwin." Amelia frowned. "Darwin? The guy who could adapt to anything? I thought he died years ago." "He did," Evan replied. "But his mutation makes his genetic material invaluable. If I can locate his remains, I might be able to extract his DNA and unlock the secrets of his evolution." Her skepticism was evident. "Even if you find his body, what makes you think you can use it?" Evan gave a small, unreadable smile. "That's for me to worry about." She studied him for a moment. "You always have a plan, don't you?" "Always," he said simply. She sighed, shaking her head. "And how do you plan to find a body that's been missing for decades?" "I've been analyzing historical records, eyewitness accounts, and classified documents. There's a pattern, a trail that leads to a remote location in upstate New York. I believe that's where he was buried. And I suppose you want me to come with you?" Evan's expression didn't change. "It would be more efficient." She hesitated, then exhaled. "All right, let's find your mutant." The following evening, under the cover of darkness, Evan and Amelia set out for upstate New York. The journey was silent, each lost in thought. Evan's mind raced with the possibilities that Darwin's DNA could offer, while Amelia seemed more focused on why he wanted it. After hours of driving through winding forest roads, they arrived at an unmarked, overgrown path. Evan consulted his notes, confirming they were in the right place. "This is it," he said, stepping out of the vehicle. Amelia followed, scanning the dense foliage. "Doesn't look like much." "That's the point," Evan replied. They wanted to keep it hidden. They trekked through the woods, guided by Evan's meticulous research. Eventually, they reached a small clearing where an unassuming stone marker lay half-buried under moss and leaves. Evan knelt beside it, brushing away the debris to reveal an inscription. "Armando Munoz, a friend and hero." "This is it," he murmured. Amelia glanced around nervously. "We should be quick." I don't like being out here exposed. Evan nodded, producing a set of tools from his bag. With precision and care, he began to exhume the grave. After some time, they uncovered a simple wooden coffin, weathered by decades. Opening it, they found Darwin's remains, remarkably well preserved due to the unique properties of his mutation. Evan carefully collected tissue samples, placing them into sterile containers. As he worked, Amelia kept watch, her senses alert. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked quietly. Evan paused, looking up at her. "If we can decode his genetic structure, we could revolutionize our understanding of adaptation. Imagine the possibilities." She nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Power like that can be dangerous." Evan gave her a neutral look. "That depends on who wields it." With the sample secured, they carefully reburied the coffin and made their way back to the vehicle. The drive back to Mercer Biotech was filled with a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. Once they arrived at the facility, Evan wasted no time. He stored the samples in a controlled preservation unit and then sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had the genetic material. Now, he had to learn how to use it. Evan had never formally studied biology or genetics. His knowledge of mutations came from scientific reports, research papers, and stolen documents from various underground sources. But understanding theory was one thing. Applying it was another. If he was going to unlock the secrets of Darwin's DNA, he had to educate himself. Over the next week, Evan did nothing but study. Every waking moment was spent absorbing knowledge. Genetic coding, cellular regeneration, DNA manipulation, CRISPR technology, the intricacies of gene splicing. He devoured books, academic journals, and classified files with the kind of obsession that would have broken a lesser mind. Amelia watched in silence. She had seen him focus before, but this was something else entirely. One night, she walked into the lab and found him at his desk, surrounded by stacks of notes and calculations scrawled across multiple whiteboards. His eyes were sharp, his mind working faster than she had ever seen. "You've barely slept," she noted. Evan didn't look up. "Sleep is irrelevant." She crossed her arms. "You're learning at a rate that shouldn't even be possible. This much information in 1 week. It takes people years to understand half of what you're reading." He finally looked at her, and for the first time, there was a glint of something deeper in his expression. "Evolution," he said simply. She exhaled, shaking her head. "You're not normal, Mercer. I never claimed to be." He turned back to his work, fingers typing rapidly as he processed new information at an inhuman pace. It wasn't just that he was learning. He was adapting, and he wasn't doing this alone. Evan knew that, despite his intelligence, true innovation required a team. Over the next few days, he began recruiting scientists, not the kind who work for recognition or prestige, but those who wanted results. Disgraced geneticists, rogue bioengineers, researchers who had been shunned by mainstream academia for their radical ideas. People who didn't care about ethics, only progress. One by one, they arrived at Mercer Biotech, intrigued by Evan's vision. Some had questions. Others simply saw an opportunity. A man named Dr. Elias Ward, a former lead researcher at an now-defunct genetic laboratory, was the first to sign on. "You want to push human evolution forward? You'll need someone who understands how to break the limits of biology." A woman named Dr. Celine Carter, an expert in regenerative genetics, was next. "Whatever you're working on, I want in. But I don't work for free." Evan smirked. Money won't be an issue. Piece by piece, the foundation was being built. The knowledge, the personnel, the resources, and at the center of it all, Evan Mercer. As he stood in his office, overlooking the growing operation, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Evan Mercer sat in his private laboratory, eyes scanning the complex genetic sequences displayed on the massive screen before him. The holographic projection detailed Darwin's genetic structure, lines of DNA sequences highlighted in various colors, mapping out his unique mutation. It was breathtakingly complex. Darwin's genome wasn't like that of any ordinary mutant. His reactive evolution gene was buried deep within his DNA, structured in a way that defied conventional biology. Unlike other mutants, whose powers were typically encoded in predictable patterns, Darwin's ability was built on dynamic genetic response, meaning his genome rewrote itself in real time under external stimuli. But for Evan, understanding it was proving far more difficult than expected. He had spent weeks trying to decipher the fundamental mechanisms that allowed Darwin to adapt to extreme conditions, but every approach led to a dead end. For all his intelligence, biology was an entirely new battlefield. Dr. Elias Ward, his lead geneticist, stood next to him, arms crossed. You're looking at the most sophisticated biological fail-safe in existence. Darwin's DNA doesn't just mutate. It anticipates threats and adapts before they even become lethal. Dr. Celine Carter, another scientist on his team, leaned forward, examining the data. We've isolated the primary mutation sites, but there's something strange about the structure. Unlike normal genes, these don't just express certain proteins. They seem to trigger an entire epigenetic cascade. Evan nodded. That's why traditional gene therapy won't work. We can't just splice his DNA into a human and expect it to function the same way. The body would reject it. Dr. Ward scoffed. Exactly. That's why mutants like Darwin are so rare. His mutation is not static. It's a self-contained, living adaptation engine. Trying to replicate that would require rewriting the host's entire genetic structure. That was the problem. Darwin's mutation wasn't just genetic. It was fluid, meaning any attempt to integrate it into a normal body would either fail outright or lead to uncontrolled, unstable mutations. They had already tried multiple approaches, each one ending in disaster. The first attempt had been CRISPR-based genetic editing, injecting the modified sequence into test cultures. The cells mutated erratically, forming grotesque, cancerous growths before breaking down entirely. The second approach had been stem cell fusion, introducing Darwin's genetic material into rapidly dividing cells. That experiment had lasted a little longer, until the cells adapted so aggressively that they started consuming themselves as part of an internal evolutionary race. Evan watched it all unfold with cold calculation. Failure was expected. Failure was necessary. 3 of Mercer Biotech's largest investors arrived at the private research facility after hearing about the numerous failed attempts. They were men accustomed to results, not patience. Howard Vance, the most outspoken among them, glanced around the lab with narrowed eyes before turning to Evan. We've put a lot of money into this, Mercer. I expected more than a collection of failed test reports. Victor Langley, a high-profile investor in the pharmaceutical industry, crossed his arms. You promised a breakthrough, and so far, all we see is wasted effort. Evan remained unshaken. Every failure refines our understanding. We are dealing with the most complex genetic trait known to science. If you thought this would be easy, you invested in the wrong man. The room went silent. Vance studied Evan, as if trying to gauge if he was bluffing. Then, surprisingly, he chuckled. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Langley, however, wasn't so amused. But where's the progress? You need something concrete, Mercer. Evan didn't hesitate. He gestured toward the massive screen displaying genetic sequencing models. You're looking at progress. We are closer than any research group in history to engineering controlled evolution. But we have one obstacle left, human testing. The third investor, Conrad Holt, who had remained quiet until now, spoke. Animal trials won't work, will they? Evan shook his head. No. Darwin's adaptation gene is uniquely human. Testing it on anything else would be a waste of time. If we want real results, we need test subjects capable of sustaining genetic restructuring. A long silence stretched between them. Then Vance smirked. I think I can arrange that. 2 days later, a transport van arrived at Mercer Biotech's underground research division. Inside were prisoners, hand-selected by the investors, murderers, traffickers, and men whose disappearances wouldn't raise questions. Evan watched as they were unloaded, each one drugged and restrained. Dr. Ward exhaled sharply. So this is happening. Evan's expression was unreadable. It was always going to happen. The experiments began immediately. The first batch of test subjects received direct injections of modified Darwin DNA. The results were horrifying, Some developed grotesque tumors. Others screamed as their bodies twisted in unnatural ways, their cells unable to regulate the constant adaptive response. Evan observed everything with an eerie calmness. He wasn't wasting lives, he was refining the process. With each failure, he gathered new data, new patterns, new hypotheses. Weeks passed. The failures piled up, but Evan's mind was processing everything at an inhuman speed. He could feel himself learning faster than before, understanding concepts in mere days that should have taken years. Then, one night, everything changed. As Evan sat in his lab, studying the latest failed subject's genetic decay, he felt something shift inside his mind. A deep, intrinsic awareness. His intelligence had evolved again, reaching level 4. His cognitive speed had reached a point where he could now mentally simulate biological processes before conducting them, reducing failures significantly. He was understanding genetic adaptation on an intuitive level, no longer just relying on theoretical knowledge. He immediately started rewriting the genetic formula, modifying the triggers for adaptation, ensuring the subject's body would respond only to specific stimuli, preventing uncontrolled mutations. The next test was performed on a fresh subject. This time, the results were different. Instead of rapid failure, the test subject's vitals stabilized. Within an hour, his immune system began rapidly adapting to foreign infections, his body rejecting and neutralizing them before they could take hold. A complete immunity system overhaul. Dr. Ward, reading the live data, let out a breathless laugh. "We did it." Celine Carter stared at the subject's readouts, her voice in disbelief. This could wipe out diseases entirely. The other scientists who had been part of the grueling failures erupted in cheers. Some clapped. Others simply stared at the breakthrough unfolding before them. Evan simply nodded. He already knew they had succeeded. The investors were called immediately, and when they arrived, Vance's expression changed the moment he saw the results. "Mercer, this is beyond anything we imagined." Langley, who had been skeptical before, was now nodding in approval. This could reshape the entire pharmaceutical industry. Evan simply smiled. "And now, gentlemen, you see the future." No one knew the truth. There wasn't just one serum. The one he showed them, the cure for 98% of the world's diseases, was what the world would get. The other serum, the one that could force unrestricted adaptation to any condition, was his alone. Only Amelia knew, and she knew better than to ask questions. Evan had done what no one else could. He had taken Darwin's evolution and made it his own. Evan sat in the dimly lit conference room of Mercer Biotech, fingers lightly drumming against the polished oak table. Across from him sat Howard Vance, Victor Langley, and Conrad Holt, the three primary investors who had poured millions into his company, their expressions a mixture of greed and anticipation. The legal contracts lay untouched before them. Thick stacks of documents detailing ownership structure, patents, and market strategies for the upcoming serum release. Vance, always the most impatient, adjusted his cufflinks. "All right, Mercer, let's get to the real discussion. Equity distribution." Langley, ever the strategist, leaned forward. "Considering that we've been financing this operation from the start, we expect a fair division of shares." Holt, who had remained quiet so far, exhaled. "A company like Mercer Biotech will be bigger than any pharmaceutical corporation in history once this goes public. That means we need leverage to ensure our investments aren't undermined later." Evan smirked, as if he had expected this exact conversation. He clasped his hands together, his voice calm and measured. "Gentlemen, let's not waste time pretending we don't know what's at stake here. We all want control, but let's be clear, without me, there is no Mercer Biotech." Langley arched an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we take a minority position?" Evan's smile widened ever so slightly. "I'm not suggesting. I'm stating. I keep 60% ownership of the company. You three will receive 8% each as permanent, non-controlling shares. The remaining 16% will be distributed among government agencies and top elites, because let's be real, they'll want their cut whether we like it or not." Vance narrowed his eyes. "You expect us to agree to just 8% each, after everything we've put into this company. Langley chuckled, though there was no humor in it. That's highway robbery, Mercer. We expected at least 20% each. Evan leaned back, letting the silence stretch. He wanted them to stew in their frustration before hitting them with the reality they hadn't considered. I understand your frustration, he said smoothly. But let me ask you something. Which one of you developed the serum? The room remained silent. Which one of you ensured that it works flawlessly? Evan continued. Which one of you ran the genetic trials, engineered the controlled dilution process, and ensured that we can sell 2 different versions without anyone noticing the manipulation? Holt's jaw tightened. We provided the funding, and you'll get your returns. Massive ones, might I add. Evan gestured to the financial projections on the table. But funding alone doesn't make a company successful. If I walk away tomorrow, Mercer Biotech collapses instantly. You'll have patents, but no one else on this planet can reproduce my results. Vance's face darkened. You're backing us into a corner. Evan's smirk didn't waver. I'm simply reminding you of reality. Langley exhaled sharply. Even if we agreed to this ridiculous proposal, the government won't just stand by and let you control something this powerful. Evan nodded, which is why I'm offering them 16%, ensuring that they have a vested interest in our success rather than working to suppress us. That's why we will sell the elite version of the serum privately to high-ranking officials, ensuring their loyalty. Vance was silent, fingers tapping against the table. And you expect us to just accept 8%. Evan tilted his head. Let's be honest. What other choice do you have? Langley clenched his jaw. We could push back, force a renegotiation, bring in outside scientists. Evan let out a low chuckle. You could try. But tell me, Langley, how long do you think Mercer Biotech will survive without me? How long before our competitors get wind of this and try to dismantle us? Before the government starts probing into your assets? Holt sighed, rubbing his temples. He's right. We can't replace him. Vance's lips pressed into a thin line, frustration evident in every muscle of his face. He was a man used to winning negotiations, but this time he was outplayed before he even sat down. Langley let out a slow breath. 8%, huh? Evan nodded. 8% each. Silence stretched in the room once more before Holt reached for the pen and signed first. Vance and Langley followed, albeit begrudgingly. Evan took the signed contracts and tucked them neatly into his briefcase. I appreciate your understanding of the bigger picture. Langley shook his head, muttering, I've never been robbed so politely in my life. Evan smirked. Welcome to the future, gentlemen. Days later, the first whispers began. Mercer Biotech's breakthroughs hadn't gone unnoticed. In the Pentagon, a high-ranking military general sat in his office, staring at a classified report detailing the effects of Mercer's serum. His fingers drummed against the wooden desk as he turned to his subordinate. This is a problem, the general muttered. A private company having the ability to control the world's diseases? That's more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Across the ocean, intelligence agencies scrambled for information. The CIA, MI6, and even the KGB were all paying attention now. If the serum was real, and everything pointed to the fact that it was, then whoever controlled Mercer Biotech controlled the future. In New York, a representative from Stark Industries sat across from a government official, reviewing a similar report. Howard Stark is going to know about this, the man muttered. And I don't think he'll be thrilled. The government didn't need more powerful private interests. The elite didn't like when something this revolutionary was outside their control. Within days, representatives from multiple agencies reached out to Mercer Biotech, demanding a stake. By the end of the week, Evan had grudgingly signed over a portion of shares, ensuring that those in power wouldn't try to bury his company before it even got off the ground. In his office, he read over the final contract, where the remaining 16% of Mercer Biotech was now distributed among the highest-ranking elites in America. He had anticipated this. It was inevitable. Amelia entered the room, holding a document. The government got what they wanted. But you know this isn't the end of it, right? Evan smirked, leaning back. Of course it isn't. They got their shares, but they don't have me. She studied him carefully. You're still disappearing from the public eye. He nodded. For now. But you'll still be in contact with me. She sighed. You love playing games, don't you? Evan's smirk widened. It's not a game if you never lose. By morning, Mercer Biotech shares have been officially distributed, the government stake secured, and the undercurrents of power were already shifting. And Evan Mercer? He had disappeared from the public eye. Evan sat in his private laboratory, a sterile, dimly lit space filled with the quiet hum of machinery. The vial containing Darwin's modified genetic material rested on a metal tray beside him. This moment had been weeks in the making, studying, refining, ensuring that the gene splicing process wouldn't result in catastrophic failure like it had for the test subjects. Darwin's mutation was unlike anything else. His genome rewrote itself in real time, constantly adjusting to external conditions. But there was a fundamental flaw in its original state. It lacked permanence. The adaptations were situational, shifting with each new threat, but never fully retaining their evolution. That wouldn't do for Evan. He had rewritten the gene's epigenetic markers, ensuring that any adaptation would be recorded into his genetic structure permanently. Unlike Darwin, who adapted on instinct, Evan would be able to choose which changes stayed. Now, the time had come to test whether his body could handle the transformation. He took a deep breath, rolled up his sleeve, and injected the serum directly into his circulatory system, ensuring rapid distribution throughout his body. At first, there was silence. Then the pain hit. It was indescribable. His muscles tightened, his bones ached, and every cell in his body felt like it was being torn apart and reassembled. His nerves fired uncontrollably, sending jolts of searing pain through his limbs. His heart pounded like a machine operating beyond its limits, struggling to process the genetic rewrite in real time. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he saw his own DNA shifting in microscopic detail, strands unwinding and rebonding at an impossible rate. His entire genetic code was being rewritten to accept the mutation. Then it was over. He exhaled sharply, beads of sweat running down his face. But something was different. His breath came easier, his muscles felt more efficient, and his skin had an underlying resilience it hadn't possessed before. He glanced at the screen, displaying his biological metrics, and his system's interface finally responded. Reactive evolution acquired. System analysis, reactive evolution. Level 1, basic adaptive immunity, unlocked. Automatically resists environmental threats, temperature shifts, toxins, mild injuries. Healing speed, slightly increased. Adaptations remain temporary, lasting only as long as the threat persists. Estimated time until Level 2, 24 hours. Projected evolution timeline. Level 2, unlocked in 1 day. Adaptations begin to last longer, with some minor permanent changes. Level 3, unlocked in a week. Reflexive evolution enhances, allowing instant physiological shifts in response to threats. Level 4, unlocked in 1 month. Adaptive control reaches near perfection. System upgrades stop as ability transitions to semi-active. After Level 4, Evan would have to refine his evolution manually, training, experimenting, and pushing his body to adapt on its own. This was the first and last time the system would assist him in refining the skill. He exhaled, already calculating how best to test his new power. The first test was simple. He lowered the temperature in the lab to near freezing levels. Within minutes, his body began compensating, increasing his core temperature without requiring external energy expenditure. His blood vessels constricted just enough to retain heat, and a mild thermal resistance developed across his skin. He switched the temperature to extreme heat. His body adjusted again, sweat production optimizing without excessive dehydration, his metabolism slightly increasing to regulate cooling efficiency. His adaptation had already begun. Evan took a scalpel, pressing it against his palm, and made a shallow incision. The wound stung, but his blood clotted almost immediately. He watched as the edges of the cut began knitting together faster than an ordinary human's. Not quite Wolverine-level regeneration, but noticeable. Satisfied, he turned toward a more extreme test. A gun lay on the table, a standard caliber pistol. He took a deep breath, aimed carefully, and fired at his forearm. The bullet tore into his flesh, pain flaring as the impact knocked his arm back. Blood oozed from the wound, but before his body could go into shock, something remarkable happened. The injury stabilized almost instantly. His cells worked overtime, rapidly forming new tissue layers, sealing the wound in mere minutes where a normal human would have bled for hours. The process wasn't painless, but the efficiency was beyond anything a human body should be capable of. However, something was clear. His body hadn't prevented the injury from happening in the first place. At level 1, his adaptation was still reactionary. His body only responded after a threat had already occurred, meaning it wasn't fast enough to prevent things like bullets from harming him. That meant while he healed faster, he wasn't immune to direct attacks yet. That would change soon. Evan moved to the training room, where a mechanized combat dummy stood ready. He activated its high-speed attack mode, which would simulate superhuman-level combat conditions. The moment the dummy struck, his body responded on its own. He wasn't consciously dodging, yet his movements adjusted mid-motion. When a strike's aimed for his ribs, his muscles instinctively tensed in the exact location needed to absorb impact. When the dummy threw a spinning kick, his center of gravity shifted automatically, allowing him to roll with the attack rather than take full force. This wasn't just prediction. It was real-time adaptation in its purest form. But there was a limit. The more he pushed himself, the more he felt an underlying strain in his cellular framework. Gene saturation. It was a problem he had anticipated. As his body evolved, each new adaptation placed increasing stress on his genetic architecture. If he wasn't careful, he could reach a point where his body would refuse further changes. Excessive adaptations could lead to instability, where mutations start conflicting with one another. He might develop chronic cellular degradation, making further evolution slower or even impossible. He needed a solution before he reached level 4. His mind was already racing through possibilities. Genetic stabilizers, artificial regulatory markers, perhaps even a second-tier mutation system that would allow him to selectively erase old adaptations to make room for new ones. He had time to figure it out. For now, he had one last test. Evan took a deep breath and stepped into an isolated containment chamber, where the oxygen levels were steadily decreasing. At first, his lungs struggled. His body screamed for air. Then, adaptation kicked in. His red blood cell production spiked, his oxygen efficiency increased, and his metabolism slowed just enough to prolong survival. By the time he reached near hypoxic levels, he was still standing. Satisfied, he switched the air back to normal and let out a slow, measured breath. His body was evolving, and this was only the beginning. By the next morning, the system alerted him that level 2 had been reached. He stared at his hands, flexing his fingers as he felt the ever-growing efficiency in his biological structure. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. The pistol test had proved that level 1 had limitations. It took time for his body to register a threat and evolve accordingly. That was why the bullet had been able to injure him. Now, at level 2, the situation had changed. Threats like small firearms were no longer immediate dangers. His body now preemptively hardened against expected physical trauma, meaning a bullet would no longer penetrate skin as easily. His evolution had taken a step forward, and soon, there would be no threats left that his body couldn't handle. Evan sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the apartment he had taken over, elbows on his knees, fingers loosely folded as he stared at the floor. The room was quiet except for the occasional car rolling past outside, but his mind was anything but calm. One night, one sleep, and everything had changed. The world felt slower, more organized, as if every piece of reality had shifted into focus. When he first activated the passive evolution system, it had scanned him for any innate traits, but he'd had none. No mutations, no enhanced biology. Just a human body and an ordinary mind. That was enough. The system had seized on the only thing it could evolve, his cognition. That was how he unlocked his first passive skill. Passive skill unlocked. enhanced neural processing. Level 1, Level 2, progress 100%. At first it felt minor, slightly sharper focus, cleaner memory. But after one night, Level 2 had rewritten everything. Enhanced neural processing. 5 evolutionary stages. Level 1. Increased information retention. Improved memory, better mental organization, steadier emotions and stress. Level 2. Accelerated cognitive processing, unlocked overnight. Thought speed increased 5-fold. Mental fatigue, drastically reduced. Emotional reactions automatically regulated. Level 3. Multi-layered thinking, EST unlock. 1 week. Simultaneous, complex thoughts. Strong predictive reasoning. Resistance to psychic interference. Level 4. Hyperlogical analysis, EST unlock. 1 month. Perfect information recall. Deep strategic foresight. Subtle speech manipulation. Level 5. Limitless intelligence, EST unlock. 1 year. No mental fatigue. Instant mastery of logical subjects. True hyper-awareness. The immediate changes. Evan rolled a coin between his fingers, studying the subtle shifts in his perception. Everything was faster. A glance at the clock told him more than the time. His mind instantly calculated how many seconds had passed since he last looked down to the millisecond. Thoughts no longer stumbled or paused. They connected like a flowing river, branching into conclusions at impossible speed. Every detail from the previous day sat neatly stored, ready to be recalled without effort. He felt sharper, lighter, completely in control. A test, the coin flip. Evan flicked the coin upward. The world didn't slow down. His mind sped up. He saw each rotation, the glint of light along the metal, the exact arc it followed. A dozen calculations ran in his head at once. Before it finished falling, his hand snapped up and caught it cleanly. Not reflex. Prediction. The emotional firewall. He still felt emotions, but they no longer dictated anything. Annoyance dimmed before it could take hold. Fear translated directly into calculation. Surprise became analysis. Not detachment, optimization. He wasn't becoming a machine. He still wanted, still cared, still had ambition. But nothing would ever cloud his judgment again. Drawbacks. The upgrade wasn't perfect. Information overload. He noticed everything. Too much. Boredom. Conversations already felt predictable. Sleep issues. His mind refused to stop processing. Manageable, all of it. And this was only level 2. Evan stood, stretching his shoulders as the next issue rose to the front of his mind. He didn't exist here. No legal identity meant no bank account, no housing, and too much risk. He had 2 options. Forge an identity, or find someone who could do it for him. Forging was too risky for now. He needed a network, someone with access to black market documents. And in 1963 New York, there was only one type of place to find those people. Underground clubs. His eyes moved to the wallet he'd taken from Michael Carter. Inside it, a membership card. The Black Oak Club. Money, influence, secrets, and crime flowed through places like that. Exactly what he needed. Evan slipped the wallet into his pocket and headed for the door, a faint smile touching his lips. It was time to pay the club a visit. If the government confirmed she was a mutant, they could easily frame her as a threat. They wouldn't arrest her. They would use her as an excuse to justify tighter regulations on private biotech firms. And if she vanished, no one would ask questions. She stood up, her decision already made. Find Evan. He needs to know. Back in his lab, Evan was already piecing together the pattern before Amelia even arrived. He had intercepted government surveillance chatter, noting an increased focus on Mercer Biotech in the last 48 hours. The timing wasn't coincidental. When Amelia walked into the lab, he was already waiting. "They've outed me," she said simply. "I know," Evan replied. His voice wasn't panicked, nor did it carry concern. It was purely calculating. X-Corp wants to use you as leverage against Mercer Biotech. The government, meanwhile, will see this as an opportunity to justify enhanced mutant monitoring. She folded her arms. "What's our move?" Evan turned to one of his unmarked communication consoles and typed out a single encrypted message. We control the narrative before they do. Amelia raised an eyebrow. You're going public with the serum? No, Evan said. We're going public with you. Her eyes narrowed. What? We get ahead of the smear campaign. We showcase Mercer Biotech as a company focused on medical innovation, not mutant exploitation. You become a public figure, the intelligent, charismatic face of a new medical revolution. He glanced at her, a hint of amusement in his otherwise cold gaze. No one hunts a public figure without scrutiny. You'll be untouchable. She sighed, rubbing her temple. That's actually smart. And annoying. Most smart things are, Evan replied. She sat down. An X-Corp. Evan's smirk was razor-sharp. They're about to learn that I don't play defense. He pulled up a separate terminal, accessing their private research database. Within seconds, he had their offshore accounts, black market dealings, and their secret mutant containment facilities displayed across multiple screens. Amelia's lips curled into something close to admiration. You already had this prepared? Evan shrugged. I make it a habit to keep files on potential enemies. She shook her head. I don't know whether to be impressed or worried. Evan leaned back, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Both. She exhaled. So what happens now? Evan's smirk widened. X-Corp thinks they're hunters. Let's see how they handle being the prey. Amelia chuckled. And the government? Evan's gaze darkened slightly. I'll deal with them in my own way. The conversation ended, but the undercurrents of war had already begun. Evan's evolution was far from over. And soon, the world would see what came next. Evan leaned back in his chair, fingers moving effortlessly over the keyboard as he dove deeper into the digital underbelly of the government's classified databases. His eyes scanned lines of code at speeds no human should be capable of, navigating military-grade encryption as though it were a simple puzzle. He wasn't just hacking. He was reconstructing reality itself, piece by piece, shifting the balance of power without anyone realizing it. With every keystroke, agencies across the country unknowingly had their surveillance systems rewritten, their priorities redirected. The intelligence community prided itself on control, on knowing everything before it happened. But Evan was beyond them now. He wasn't reacting to their moves. He was the one making them. His first move had been to erase Amelia's existence from all federal mutant tracking databases. It wasn't enough to delete her. He needed to replace her with something more interesting. Across multiple classified reports, he planted false leads, fabricated sightings of powerful mutants in strategic locations, forcing intelligence agencies to shift their focus elsewhere. A mutant reportedly surfaced in Chicago, another in Los Angeles, a supposed Omega-level threat sighted in Washington, D.C. He fabricated witness statements, altered old reports, and even planted staged evidence into their systems, creating video surveillance footage and grainy photographs using hacked cameras to suggest something big was happening. Within minutes, analysts, field agents, and top intelligence officers were scrambling to respond to a mutant outbreak that didn't exist. But Evan wasn't done. He turned his attention to X-Corp. The corporate giant had operated in the shadows for years, conducting inhumane experiments on mutants, ensuring that no government authority could touch them. That changed today. With a few simple alterations, he made it appear as if X-Corp had been violating a dozen international agreements, engaging in illegal human experimentation, off-the-books weapons testing, and unauthorized genetic research. He fabricated secure emails between executives discussing classified projects, highlighting operations that would look like gross human rights violations if leaked to the right places. Then he did just that. With a few keystrokes, he anonymously leaked the fake documents to various government watchdogs, investigative journalists, and internal security teams within the Pentagon. The trap was set. As the files made their way through the intelligence community, the reaction was immediate. Inside a secure government facility, intelligence division meeting, a group of high-ranking intelligence officers sat around a long steel table, reviewing the leaked documents that had arrived in their inboxes less than an hour ago. The tension in the room was thick. These reports, one man muttered, flipping through the pages, if even half of this is real, X-Corp has been committing serious violations of international law. More than that, another agent said, tapping a page. These documents suggest that they've been conducting covert biological research on mutants, using illegal testing sites outside U.S. jurisdiction. That's a direct violation of a National Security Bioethics Act. The room was silent for a moment. Then, a higher-ranking officer at the head of the table sighed. Who leaked these? The agents exchanged glances. No origin signature, one of them replied. Anonymous drop. But whoever did it had access to internal X-Corp communications. That means this came from someone high up, possibly a whistleblower. A woman across the table spoke up, adjusting her glasses. If these documents are accurate, then X-Corp has been running unauthorized mutant detention sites. That would explain why certain mutant disappearances never got resolved. A younger agent frowned. If that's the case, why weren't we aware of it sooner? We've had surveillance on X-Corp for years. The higher-ranking officer exhaled, because they were good at covering their tracks. Until now, the agents exchanged glances again. What do we do about it? For now, the lead officer leaned forward. We put every available resource into confirming these reports. If this is real, we have no choice but to act. X-Corp headquarters, emergency executive meeting. Inside one of X-Corp's high-security conference rooms, the company's top executives sat in a state of unease. The CEO, a sharp-eyed man in his late 50s, rubbed his temples as he listened to his security chief's report. The government has already begun an internal review based on the leak files, the security chief said, flipping through printed documents. They flagged our recent activities in South America and Eastern Europe. If they dig deeper, they might uncover our classified projects. The CEO clenched his jaw. Where the hell did this leak come from? We're still trying to trace it, but the source is masked. We can't confirm if it's from inside or an outside attack. The CFO, a woman in her 40s with a cold, calculating gaze, spoke next. Regardless of the source, this means trouble. If the government believes we've been violating security protocols, they'll restrict our operations. We'll lose key defense contracts. The CEO's expression darkened. What about our government ties? We have people in the right places, senators, Pentagon officials. We can suppress this. The security chief hesitated. Normally, yes, but there's another issue. The CEO narrowed his eyes. What? Mercer Biotech. A heavy silence filled the room. Mercer Biotech, the CFO repeated, frowning. What does that have to do with this? The security chief placed a folder on the table. Shortly before these leaks surfaced, we detected a surge in Mercer Biotech's activity. They've been making major moves, acquiring patents, expanding their facilities, even preparing for a public release of their medical research. Their CEO, Evan Mercer, has been keeping a low profile, but he hesitated. There's reason to believe he's responsible for this. The CEO's gaze turned ice cold. Explain. Our cyber team detected an anomaly in our internal security network. Someone breached our private servers. Not just a normal intrusion. Whoever did this left no trace, no identifiable signature. It was a perfect digital ghost. The CFO's expression tightened. And you think Mercer Biotech is behind it? The security chief nodded. Evan Mercer is known for his work in biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and data encryption. He has the resources and the intelligence to pull off an operation like this. He's the only one capable of this level of infiltration. The CEO's hands clenched into fists. So not only is Mercer Biotech growing into a direct competitor, but they just engineered a government investigation against us. The room was silent. Then, the CEO let out a slow breath and leaned back. His voice was dangerously calm. Then it's time we remind them who they're dealing with. Back at Mercer Biotech, Evan sat at his desk, watching the chaos unfold through his hack surveillance feeds. Government agencies were launching full-scale investigations into X-Corp, tearing through their records, interrogating their staff. Meanwhile, X-Corp was scrambling internally, trying to control the damage. He had successfully diverted all attention away from Amelia. But he knew this wasn't over. X-Corp wasn't the type to roll over and accept defeat. They would retaliate. Evan smirked to himself. That was exactly what he wanted. The more they struggled, the more mistakes they would make. And the more mistakes they made, the easier it would be to destroy them completely. This was just the opening move. The real game was just beginning. Evan sat in his office, the multiple screens in front of him displaying classified intelligence reports, security feeds, and the latest news regarding X-Corp. His plan had worked, partially. The government had turned its attention to X-Corp, but that didn't mean they were allies. This was just a diversion, a way to shift focus while he continued maneuvering behind the scenes. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. The reaction had been expected, but now the real game began. His mind worked through the possibilities. X-Corp was a corporation backed by some of the most powerful elites, and the government had turned a blind eye to their activities for years. So why act now? He knew the answer because they had been forced to. Public scrutiny had risen after his strategic leaks. A scandal that large couldn't be ignored, and the government needed to maintain control. But X-Corp wouldn't sit quietly and accept their fate. They were already making their moves, and Evan had to stay ahead. The first thing he needed to confirm was how much intelligence X-Corp had on him. Unlike the government, who saw Mercer Biotech as just another rising power in the medical industry, X-Corp knew better. They suspected that Evan was responsible for their data breach and the public leaks. He pulled up a file on his screen. It contained X-Corp's recent intelligence reports, stolen directly from their own security division. His system had infiltrated their databases without them even realizing it, pulling real-time updates on their ongoing countermeasures. It was clear they were trying to profile him, but they were frustrated because there was nothing to find. His past didn't exist. There were no school records, no medical files, no childhood history, just a blank slate. They had pieced together details from the moment he had appeared, tracking his financial movements, his rapid acquisitions, and his technological advancements. The best they could do was speculate, tying his intelligence to underground tech circles, but they had no concrete proof of who he was before Mercer Biotech, and that terrified them. They were attempting multiple avenues of retaliation. Some efforts were financial, trying to manipulate stocks and force a hostile takeover of some of Mercer Biotech suppliers. Others were physical, hiring private investigators, sending surveillance drones near his properties, and even placing a few spies in government meetings to track any mention of his name. It was laughable. They were trying to understand something beyond their reach, using old-world tactics against someone who had already rewritten the rules of the game. But that didn't mean he could relax. If they were making this much effort, it meant they were desperate, and desperate people were unpredictable. His next move was to confirm why the government had truly acted against X-Corp. It was no secret that the U.S. government had always been aware of mutant experimentation, yet they had allowed it to continue for years. So why the sudden shift? Evan accessed classified intelligence reports, bypassing firewalls as if they were nothing more than locked doors with easily replicated keys. The reports confirmed what he had suspected. The government had always known about X-Corp's mutant experiments, but they had quietly allowed them to continue as long as it served a strategic purpose. They had used X-Corp's research to track potential threats, experiment with control mutations, and even develop their own Black Ops superhuman initiatives. However, Evan's leaks had pushed everything into the public eye. Before, X-Corp had been a quiet asset, something the government could use without needing to take responsibility. But now, with media pressure rising and international watchdogs investigating, the government had to pretend to be the good guys. It wasn't that they had turned against X-Corp out of morality. It was self-preservation. The most interesting thing, though, was internal government faction conflicts. Some departments still saw X-Corp as useful, while others viewed them as a liability. That meant not everyone was on the same page. If Evan played his cards right, he could turn these factions against each other, forcing them to weaken themselves while he continued expanding his influence. Later that evening, he sat across from Amelia in his office, both reviewing the information he had gathered. She was sipping coffee, her expression thoughtful. "They're taking the bait," she said, looking over the reports. "More than that," Evan replied. "The government isn't a single entity. It's a collection of competing interests. Some of them want X-Corp buried. Others still see value in their work. That division is useful to us. Amelia nodded. An X-Corp? They're already trying to counter you. Evan smirked. I expected that. He gestured to one of the screens, showing data from X-Corp's security networks. They aren't sending a full strike team, he explained. They'll start with something simple, a covert attempt, a handful of hired professionals. Maybe an accidental car crash, or a sniper. Something they think will be enough. Amelia studied him carefully. And when they fail, Evan's smirk widened. Then they escalate. And when they escalate, they make mistakes. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. You enjoy this too much. Evan chuckled. I enjoy winning. She sat down across from him. All right, so what's our next step? 2 things, Evan said. First, we monitor their agents the moment they enter the city. I already have access to their travel arrangements and mission briefings. We'll know when they move before they do. And second, Evan's smile turned razor sharp. We make sure the world sees what happens when someone tries to kill me. Meanwhile, in X-Corp's headquarters, the CEO, Nathaniel Essex, sat in his private study, reviewing the damage that had been done. Unlike the frantic responses of his board members and security teams, Essex remained calm, calculating. He had seen many things in his career. This was not the first time someone had tried to challenge him. The reports on Mercer intrigued him. There was no doubt now. Evan was responsible for the attacks on X-Corp's infrastructure, the leaks, the investigations. And yet, there was something more. Essex had built X-Corp with a singular purpose, controlling the future of human evolution. Every piece of research, every experiment, every subject they had worked on was meant to push humanity to the next level. Now, someone outside H. Evan's control was making moves that threatened everything. He had options. His company still held significant power, and his influence stretched into the highest levels of government. But he needed to know what he was dealing with. Killing Mercer outright was too risky. If he had managed to infiltrate X-Corp's systems, if he had managed to turn the government's attention away from himself, then he was more than just another businessman. That meant a direct test was required. Essex leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the desk. A name came to mind. Someone capable, someone enhanced, someone X-Corp had personally modified through their experiments. If Mercer was truly a threat, then he would prove it in battle. Essex pressed a button on his intercom. Send an agent Talon. A moment later, the doors to his office opened, and a tall, heavily built man entered, his eyes cold and calculating. Sir, Essex smiled slightly. I have a target for you. Evan sat in his office, eyes scanning multiple screens displaying security feeds and X-Corp's latest digital activity. He knew they would retaliate, and his instincts told him it wouldn't just be through corporate espionage or financial strikes. No, they needed something direct. He had already anticipated an assassination attempt. X-Corp was too invested in their own secrecy to allow a rogue element like Mercer Biotech to keep moving unchecked. They would send someone, a professional, someone enhanced, someone designed to kill. But he hadn't expected this. His screen flickered, bringing up newly decrypted files. X-Corp's Black Ops personnel database had been tight, but not tight enough to keep him out forever. He had uncovered the name of their primary enforcer. Agent Talon, a perfect hunter, engineered for adaptability and close-quarters combat. Cybernetic enhancements, pain resistance, enhanced speed, and combat instincts bordering on supernatural. A man whose entire existence was designed for the sole purpose of eliminating obstacles. Evan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. This was a test. Essex wasn't just sending someone to kill him. He wanted to see what Evan was truly capable of. He smirked. Fine, let's play. Talon arrived in New York under complete anonymity. He had been inserted through a non-existent flight manifest, transported via one of X-Corp's underground networks, and equipped with a fully erased digital footprint. No security, no identification, no trace. Mercer Biotech security was tight, but Talon was trained for this level of intrusion. He studied the cityscape from the rooftop of an abandoned warehouse, scanning for electromagnetic signals and heat signatures. Mercer's security detail operated with advanced counter-surveillance technology, but nothing was infallible. He had already mapped the patterns of Mercer's security patrols camera rotations, and automated countermeasures. His entry point was simple: the blind spot created by the angle of a rooftop-mounted drone camera. A 4-second window. He moved instantly, landing with precision as he scaled down the side of Mercer Biotech's headquarters, using magnetic grip pads embedded in his gloves. He avoided detection perfectly, maneuvering across steel and glass until he reached an open vent shaft leading into the lower floors. Inside, Evan was already watching. He had designed a security system to always alert him to anomalies, no matter how small. A blind spot in his camera rotation, a missing frame in his security feed, all deliberate, all expected. The moment Talon entered the vent system, Evan smiled. Right on time. He stood, rolling his shoulders as he moved toward his designated engagement zone, a hollowed-out section of the research facility designed for simulated combat testing. Large open space, reinforced flooring, and multiple environmental hazards hidden in plain sight. This was no longer just an assassination attempt. This was an experiment. Talon moved silently through the facility, his enhanced vision picking up infrared signatures, scanning for movement. His HUD displayed the building's internal schematics, highlighting areas of potential traps. Yet something was off. This wasn't a corporate office space anymore. It had been modified. The lighting was deliberately dimmed. The walls contained reinforced plating. The air was thick with ionized particles, disrupting electronic readings. It was a combat zone. He's waiting for me. Talon's instincts screamed danger, but he had been built for this. No hesitation. He moved forward, drawing his twin retractable talons, his muscles tensing in preparation. Then, the floor beneath him shifted. The moment Talon stepped into the designated trap zone, a powerful electromagnetic pulse activated, momentarily disrupting his cybernetic HUD. No digital tracking. No enhanced vision. For the first time in years, Talon was operating on pure instinct. Evan's voice echoed from the overhead speakers. Your profile says you can adapt quickly. Let's put that to the test. Talon reacted instantly, lunging forward, ignoring the system failure. He didn't need computers to kill. But Evan wasn't standing still. A sonic pulse erupted from concealed speakers, sending a high-frequency signal that disoriented Talon's enhanced hearing. He faltered for less than a second, but a second was all Evan needed. Evan moved. He struck low, aiming for the knee, forcing Talon to adjust his stance. A normal person would have collapsed. Talon didn't. Instead, he spun mid-air, using the momentum to redirect the force, slashing at Evan's chest with razor-sharp claws. Evan narrowly dodged, feeling the air split beside his skin. Talon was fast. Faster than Evan had calculated. But that was fine. He wanted to see how fast. Evan let Talon press the attack, deliberately testing his own body's limits. Each strike forced his adaptive evolution to work overtime, reinforcing his bones, enhancing his reaction speed. But there were limits. Talon's speed was pushing him to his current threshold. His regeneration worked, but he still felt the impact of Talon's attacks. If he had been any slower, he would have been dead in seconds. Evan baited Talon into lunging at him, sidestepping at the last second and triggering a high-pressure gas valve, blinding Talon momentarily. In that instant, Evan struck at the base of his skull, precisely targeting the vagus nerve cluster. Talon's body jerked violently. His enhanced systems tried to compensate, but the nerve disruption sent his autonomic functions into overdrive, paralyzing his heart, flooding his brain with misfired signals. For the first time, Talon couldn't move. His body locked in place, his enhanced reflexes failing as his muscles spasmed uncontrollably. Evan watched as his opponent collapsed, eyes flickering as life drained from them. He had shut down his nervous system with a single, calculated strike. Evan exhaled. He had won, but not without learning something crucial. Talon had exposed his weaknesses. He still had limits. And if X-Corp had more like him, Evan needed to evolve even further. He stepped over the corpse, his mind already moving ahead to the next challenge. This was just the beginning. Evan stood over Talon's lifeless body, the weight of his latest victory settling into his mind. The fight had been a test, not just of his abilities, but of his adaptability. Talon had been engineered for efficiency, a walking weapon optimized for assassination. And yet, Evan had outthought him, proving that raw enhancements alone weren't enough to kill him. But this wasn't over. He turned his gaze to the security monitors, ensuring there were no external alerts or uninvited observers. He had built Mercer Biotech's security systems from the ground up, embedding layers of redundancies and countermeasures into its digital infrastructure. If X-Corp was watching, they'd find nothing but an uninterrupted security feed, showing a completely normal night inside the facility. Now came the real problem, disposing of the evidence. Talon's corpse was a goldmine of genetic modifications and cybernetic implants, and leaving it behind was out of the question. Evan crouched beside the body, running an internal analysis of what he had learned. Talon had been faster than Evan had accounted for, which meant X-Corp had perfected speed-based combat enhancements. He had also been resilient, able to shake off injuries that would incapacitate a normal enhanced human. But ultimately, he still had vulnerabilities. His nervous system, no matter how augmented, still followed the rules of biology. And that was where Evan had beaten him. His precise nerve strike had completely shut down Talon's autonomic functions, disrupting his body's ability to regulate itself. It was an exploitable flaw, one Evan would use again if X-Corp sent more enforcers. But first, he needed to eliminate any trace of the fight. He dragged the body toward the facility's biological disposal chamber, a high-tech lab space where failed experiments and contaminated materials were incinerated. The walls were reinforced with heat-resistant alloys, and the temperature control systems could vaporize organic matter down to the molecular level. As he activated the sequence, he watched Talon's remains dissolve into nothing, leaving no DNA, no cybernetics, no trace of his existence. It was as if he had never been here. And that was exactly what Evan wanted. With the body gone, Evan turned his attention to his next task, covering his tracks digitally. X-Corp would notice Talon's disappearance, but they wouldn't immediately link it to Evan. Talon had been sent on a clandestine mission, one that wasn't supposed to exist in any official record. Evan manipulated X-Corp's internal databases, injecting false security logs and digital timestamps that suggested Talon had gone rogue, operating outside of his assigned parameters. He planted evidence that suggested Talon had been eliminated by an unknown third party, possibly a rival corporation. Then, he set up an automated AI subroutine that would slowly leak this fabricated information into classified government channels over the next several days. The result? X-Corp would be forced to investigate themselves, while the government would increase scrutiny on their activities. A perfect diversion. Evan stepped away from the monitors, feeling a shift in his body. It was happening again. His breathing slowed as his nervous system adapted, and an overwhelming sensation of mental clarity and physical awareness filled his senses. He clenched his fist, feeling the subtle increase in reaction time, muscle coordination, and internal energy flow. Level 4 had been reached. His mind processed the changes instantly. His cognitive functions had expanded, allowing him to analyze data and predict outcomes with even greater accuracy. His cellular structure had reinforced itself, increasing his stamina and overall efficiency. But something felt different this time. As he checked his biometrics, he noticed a concerning pattern. His genes were reaching a saturation point. This wasn't unexpected. His body was adapting too fast, evolving at a rate beyond normal biological limits. If he kept pushing his enhancements without a proper foundation, he risked genetic instability, an outcome he wouldn't allow. He needed a long-term solution, but that would come later. For now, he focused on another immediate priority, Mercer Biotech's public product launch. Amelia was already overseeing the preparations. The upcoming launch would introduce Mercer Biotech's first publicly available medical product, a revolutionary serum designed to eliminate nearly 98% of all known human diseases. Of course, the real serum, the one capable of true biological adaptation, would remain in Evan's hands. The public version was powerful but controlled. It would serve as the stepping stone, allowing him to establish Mercer Biotech as the world's leading pharmaceutical empire, while keeping the true breakthroughs for himself. Evan met with Amelia in one of the upper-floor conference rooms, overlooking the city skyline. She was reviewing the final details, speaking with corporate representatives and legal advisors. When she noticed him enter, she dismissed the others with a wave. "You've been busy," she said, folding her arms. "I assume Talon is taken care of?" Evan nodded. "There's nothing left of him. Not even X-Corp will find evidence." She studied him for a moment, as if analyzing his demeanor. "You don't seem particularly satisfied," she noted. He exhaled. "Because the fight revealed something. I'm still not where I need to be." She raised an eyebrow. "You just took out one of X-Corp's top enforcers. That's more than most people can say." "But I had to outthink him," Evan said, his voice calm but firm. "If I had fought him on equal ground, I wouldn't have won." Amelia's expression turned serious. "So what's next?" Evan glanced at the product launch reports on the table, then back to her. "I need to evolve further," he said. "And that means I need materials. Research. More than what we have now." Amelia narrowed her eyes. "You're planning something?" He smirked. "Of course I am." She sighed. "Let me guess. You won't be at the public launch?" "No," Evan said simply. "That's your role. I'll be working on something more important." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "Fine. I'll handle the public face. But be careful, Evan. If X-Corp sent Talon, they'll send someone else." "I know," Evan said. "And next time, I'll be ready." Amelia gave him a final glance before leaving the room. Evan turned toward the window, watching the city lights stretch into the horizon. He had reached level 4. His mind and body were stronger than ever, but he was now approaching his biological limits. He needed a solution, a way to surpass his current state without instability, and he already had an idea where to start. This was only the beginning. Evan sat in his private research lab, scanning through the data collected over the past few weeks. His biological evolution had reached a saturation point, and if he continued pushing his limits recklessly, it could result in genetic collapse, a fate he wasn't willing to risk. He needed a solution. The answer lay in expanding his genetic adaptability beyond natural constraints, but existing biological enhancement methods weren't sufficient. To take the next step, he required cutting-edge materials, rare biological components, and classified military-grade biotechnology. With Mercer Biotech's public launch imminent, he had the perfect cover to acquire everything he needed under the radar: the acquisition of evolutionary materials. Evan's first move was to secure rare biological components, tissue samples, advanced synthetic gene sequences, and enhancement serums that had never been publicly disclosed. Using his underground black market contacts, he orchestrated the acquisition of high-grade cellular cultures from secret military projects, tissue samples from test subjects exposed to experimental enhancement serums, advanced neurological growth factors used in intelligence augmentation trials, illegally classified stem cell research data from abandoned government projects. His deep web transactions ensured his identity remained untraceable. No direct involvement, no paper trails. Mercer Biotech had no official connection to these acquisitions. Everything was routed through disposable intermediaries and shell corporations. With these materials in hand, Evan could finally begin modifying his genetic research, looking for ways to bypass his body's current evolutionary limits. But while his private experiments were progressing, Mercer Biotech was about to change the medical industry forever. The highly anticipated public product launch of Mercer Biotech's first commercialized medicine took place in one of the most exclusive medical conferences in the world, attended by top pharmaceutical executives, medical researchers, and high-ranking government officials. Amelia took center stage, standing before a packed hall of some of the most powerful individuals in the world. The air was thick with anticipation, and reporters were already broadcasting live as she stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a turning point in medical history," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "For decades, we have fought against diseases, spending billions on research, creating treatments that only slow symptoms rather than cure them. That changes today. She gestured to the massive screen behind her, where the two revolutionary medicines were displayed. 1. Vitalizar, entry-level version. Cost: $500 per monthly treatment set effect. Treats over 98% of known diseases over the course of a 1-month cycle. Application: patients need to take a prescribed set for an entire month for the full effect. Target market: middle-class consumers, corporate health plans, and large-scale healthcare systems. Point 2. Vitalis P, premium version. Cost: $5,000 per weekly treatment effect. Same disease elimination, but condensed into 1 week instead of a month. Application: requires only 7 days of treatment for full recovery. Target market: high net worth individuals, government officials, and elite healthcare providers. A murmur spread through the audience as doctors, investors, and policymakers absorbed the information. An older man in a tailored suit, a high-ranking pharmaceutical executive, raised his hand. How do we know this isn't just another overhyped drug? The medical field is full of so-called miracle cures that never work as advertised. Amelia smirked. That's exactly why Mercer Biotech operates differently. We don't just claim results, we prove them. She turned to the side of the stage, where a large containment chamber was wheeled in. Inside was a lab rat infected with an advanced-stage degenerative disease, something previously thought to be incurable. In this chamber is a subject suffering from neurodegenerative tissue decay, untreatable by modern medicine. With a single dose of Vitalis P, we will show you the future. A robotic arm injected the serum, and within minutes, the rat's atrophied muscles began regenerating. Brain scans displayed rapid neural reconstruction, and in less than 10 minutes, the disease was completely eradicated. The audience erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted over each other, cameras flashing as corporate investors immediately started making calls. Some pharmaceutical executives paled, realizing this was the end of their monopolized medical industries. Amelia let them process what they had seen before delivering the final blow. This treatment is not a prototype. It is ready for global distribution. We are already negotiating with major governments, elite hospitals, and World Health Organizations to ensure that Vitalizar and Vitalis P become the new medical standard. She smiled, watching the world scramble to keep up with Mercer Biotech. While Amelia managed the public relations and corporate negotiations, Evan received a high-priority request from the U.S. government. A group of military officials, high-ranking defense contractors, and intelligence officers requested a private meeting. Evan met them in a discreet location, away from Mercer Biotech's headquarters. General Thomas Reynolds, an experienced Pentagon official, spoke first. "We've been monitoring your company's developments," Reynolds said, his tone professional but firm. "What you've done with Vitalis is remarkable, but raises questions." Evan leaned back, feigning mild interest. "Questions?" Reynolds slid a classified file across the table. Inside were government intelligence reports on Mercer Biotech's meteoric rise, flagged with concern. For decades, the government has invested billions into the medical industry. Yet in a matter of months, you've developed something we didn't think possible. A younger intelligence officer added, "There are factions within the government who believe your research is unnatural." Evan smiled faintly. "Unnatural? Or just beyond your understanding?" Silence. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Regardless, Mercer Biotech has gained the attention of high-level national security agencies. Some view you as a threat. Others see an opportunity." Evan gestured for him to continue. The general exhaled, then revealed the real reason for this meeting. "For years, we've been pursuing the creation of enhanced humans. The Super Soldier Serum Project was one of our greatest failures. We've never been able to make it stable. But Mercer Biotech," he locked eyes with Evan, "we believe you can make it work." Evan remained silent, flipping through the declassified reports. This was exactly what he needed: military-grade research, failed prototypes, and experimental biological enhancement formulas. He placed the file down and looked at Reynolds. "What do you need from me?" 6 months, Reynolds said. "You'll have full access to every classified enhancement project we've ever attempted. In return, We expect tangible results. Evan extended his hand. Then we have a deal. As the officials left, Evan's mind was already working through the possibilities. With government resources, classified biological samples, and military-grade research, he was now one step closer to breaking through his genetic barriers. His body was evolving. His mind was sharper than ever. But he was still not enough. He needed more. And now, he had everything required to make it happen. Evan sat in his private laboratory, surrounded by stacks of research documents, experimental notes, and genetic samples. The air smelled of sterilized metal and chemicals, the hum of cooling systems providing a monotonous backdrop to his thoughts. His gaze settled on a series of biological models projected onto printed charts pinned to the wall. Each one represented a failed attempt at surpassing the natural limitations of the human body. For weeks, he had been refining his understanding of genetic saturation, the biological threshold preventing further enhancements without severe consequences. His passive evolution system had allowed him to develop beyond human constraints, but it did not solve the underlying issue. His body was approaching its natural limit. Any further mutations could lead to genetic instability, organ failure, or outright rejection. He exhaled slowly. There was no way around it. He needed a new approach, rejecting artificial enhancements. Evan had already analyzed the failures of artificial augmentation, including government-funded enhancement programs like the Super Soldier Serum. Their flaws were obvious. Instability. Every attempt to force superhuman abilities onto a normal human resulted in genetic rejection or rapid cellular deterioration. Impermanence. Even the few successes required frequent readministration to maintain their effects. Physical degradation. Test subjects who survived enhancement often suffered from irreversible mutations, neurological disorders, or complete system failure after prolonged exposure. These methods were outdated, dependent on brute force biological engineering rather than true evolution. Evan had no interest in becoming an unstable experiment. He sought permanence, an ability to grow and evolve naturally without external intervention, which meant there was only one viable source left. Mutant DNA, the key to true evolution. Unlike artificial augmentations, mutant genes were naturally stable. Unlike genetically modified superhumans, mutants were born with abilities inherently embedded into their DNA. Their enhancements were not imposed, they were innate. If he could decode the genetic foundation of mutant evolution, he could build a system where his body didn't just adapt, but continued refining itself indefinitely. He grabbed a notepad and began outlining the requirements. Essential traits for a self-sustaining evolutionary system. Adaptive evolution. Foundation must allow his body to react and adjust to threats instantly. Regeneration factor. Stabilizer must prevent genetic damage from rapid evolution. Metabolic control. Regulator must ensure energy efficiency, avoiding burnout or overload. These weren't just enhancements. They were core biological components necessary for long-term survival. If he could integrate them, he would no longer be limited by genetic saturation. Step 1. Acquiring viable mutant DNA. The first challenge was obtaining high-quality, viable genetic samples. Standard tissue samples were useless. He needed live, genetically active material to extract the precise sequences required for modification. Using his underground contacts, he put together a 3-phase acquisition plan. Black market genome trade. Certain illegal research groups specialized in trafficking mutant genetic samples. Most were contaminated, degraded, or poorly extracted, but there was a chance of finding usable material. Government classified projects. Secret research facilities had experimented on mutants for decades. If he could access their archives, he could retrieve high-purity DNA samples from past experiments. Direct extraction from live test subjects, the most dangerous but effective method. If necessary, he would orchestrate targeted retrieval operations to ensure the samples met his standards. Each option carried risks, but the reward outweighed the dangers. If he succeeded, he wouldn't just surpass mutants, he would redefine the meaning of evolution itself. Step 2. Refining the genetic code. Even if he acquired mutant DNA, he couldn't simply inject it into himself. Random gene splicing was a guaranteed way to trigger cellular rejection and mutation failures. Instead, he needed to filter and refine each sequence, isolating only the traits that enhanced biological efficiency. This involved identifying unstable genetic markers and removing potential mutations, constructing a stable viral vector that allowed his body to integrate the new traits smoothly, simulating long-term mutation compatibility before actual integration. The key was selective evolution, taking the best traits and discarding everything else. The end result would be a biological system that continuously refined itself, ensuring perfect adaptation without unintended consequences. Step 3. Preparing for integration. Once he finalized the genetic framework, the last step would be testing the modified DNA on a controlled subject. He wouldn't risk direct integration until he was 100% certain the process was stable. This would require a private testing facility with full biological containment, controlled mutation trials on lesser subjects, data monitoring for any potential side effects. Only once the framework was proven successful would he consider injecting it into himself. Evan leaned back in his chair, staring at the compiled research notes in front of him. He had dismissed super soldier serums as relics of the past. He had cracked the foundation of mutant genetic efficiency. He had mapped out how to collect, refine, and integrate enhanced DNA. Now, all that remained was execution. His body had reached its limit, but that would change soon, because limits were meant to be broken. Evan sat in his study, reviewing the steps he had outlined for the acquisition of viable mutant DNA. He had already determined that traditional human augmentation was flawed. Mutant genetics were the only viable path to sustainable evolution. Now, the process had to begin. This wasn't a task that could be delegated blindly. The quality of the DNA samples would determine the stability of his future enhancements, and failure was not an option. He needed the best genetic material available, even if it meant getting his hands dirty. Phase 1. Black Market Genome Trade. The black market was the easiest but least reliable source. Various underground laboratories and rogue scientists had been trafficking in mutant genetic material for years, extracting DNA from captured mutants, stolen research, and illegal medical trials. Evan, using an encrypted network of proxies, arranged a meeting with a well-known genetic trafficker known only as Dr. Weiss, a former bioengineer turned smuggler. The meeting was set in a hidden underground lab beneath a decommissioned subway station, far from prying eyes. The air in the underground chamber was thick with the scent of chemicals and sterilized equipment. Dr. Weiss, a gaunt, middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and an unsettling smile, placed a cold storage container on the steel table between them. "These," Weiss said, tapping the container, "are some of the finest mutant DNA samples you'll find on the market, extracted from subjects with high regenerative capabilities and unique biological adaptations." Evan opened the case, revealing vials of mutant blood samples, tissue cultures, and genetic sequencing reports. He picked up one of the vials, inspecting the label. "This sample is degraded," he said flatly, setting it aside. "It's been exposed to improper storage conditions." Weiss frowned but composed himself quickly. "We can work out a discount. I'm not here for defective stock." Evan's gaze was cold. "Give me something of actual value, or we're done here." Weiss hesitated before reaching into a separate containment unit. He pulled out a sealed vial with a unique biometric lock. "This one," Weiss said, his voice lower. "It's untainted. I had to pay a fortune to get it out of a classified facility before they burned the remains." Evan took the vial, scanning the genetic data. The sample contained a stable X gene sequence with high biological adaptability. This would do for now. Phase 2. Government classified projects. While the black market trade had provided a starting point, Evan knew the true breakthroughs were locked away in government-controlled research facilities. Mercer Biotech's rapid rise had granted him an advantage. Several government agencies were already negotiating contracts with him, unaware that he was using those negotiations to gather intelligence. Through layers of back channels, he identified a covert genetics research facility operating under a classified government contract. This was a place where mutants had been experimented on for decades, their genetic data stored in deep archives, hidden from the world. Evan had no intention of negotiating for access. Instead, he arranged for an infiltration operation. Using a network of high-level corporate spies, he identified weaknesses in the facility's security, shift changes, blind spots, digital vulnerabilities. A well-placed bribe ensured that key personnel would be conveniently absent during his planned intrusion. The night of the operation, a hand-picked mercenary infiltration team, outfitted with the best equipment money could buy, breached the facility's perimeter. Their goal: secure primary genetic archives containing classified mutant enhancement research. Extract viable DNA samples stored under deep freeze conditions. Leave no trace of the intrusion. The operation went smoothly until an unexpected resistance team was deployed. The government had anticipated a breach and had stationed a contingency security unit, enhanced human operatives trained to eliminate threats without hesitation. Gunfire erupted in the corridors and alarms blared. Evan, watching from a remote surveillance location, issued immediate tactical orders. The mercenaries adapted, using high-powered EMP disruptors to disable security systems, while their combat specialists neutralized the threat. Within minutes, they had extracted the required genetic material and disappeared before reinforcements arrived. Back at Mercer Biotech's hidden lab, Evan examined the samples. They were flawless. Phase 3. Direct extraction from live test subjects. The most dangerous but effective method was retrieving DNA directly from live subjects. Using intelligence gathered from both government research databases and black market reports, Evan pinpointed the location of a secret mutant prison facility, a place where captured enhanced individuals were experimented on in complete secrecy. A high-risk extraction mission was prepared. Unlike the previous operation, this one required precision. The facility housed high-value mutant captives, and any mistake could expose Mercer Biotech's growing influence in the underground world. Under the cover of night, a stealth insertion team infiltrated the compound. The mission was twofold: extract targeted mutants with specific biological markers that met Evan's criteria. Secure fresh, undamaged DNA samples. The facility was heavily guarded, but they weren't prepared for an assault at this level. Using an advanced distraction technique, Evan's operatives disabled outer defenses while the infiltration team moved inside. Once inside, the team encountered mutants in containment chambers, some half-conscious, others barely alive after prolonged experimentation. Evan monitored the operation remotely, ensuring that only the most viable candidates were selected. No unnecessary risks. No distractions. His focus was singular: obtain the best genetic material and leave. By the time the facility's alarms fully activated, Evan's operatives had already extracted 2 high-priority mutant subjects and secured multiple DNA samples. Evan sat in his lab, reviewing the collection of samples before him. He had acquired everything he needed: high-quality mutant DNA samples from various sources, extracted genetic markers from live subjects, the classified research data on failed enhancement projects. With this, he could finally begin the next phase: breaking down, filtering, and integrating these genes into a workable biological framework. This was the foundation of his future evolution. The pieces were finally in place. Now, it was time to reshape himself into the pinnacle of existence. Evan stood in his private lab, surrounded by refrigeration units and containment chambers, each filled with the results of his latest acquisitions. On the sterile steel table before him, several vials held high-quality mutant DNA samples, the culmination of his recent operations. Each vial represented a different key to his next transformation. The black market specimens, while useful, had only provided a base template. The government research facility extractions had granted him classified insights into genetic compatibility, and the live test subject extractions had delivered fresh, fully active DNA sequences, the highest quality material he could obtain without direct personal experimentation. Now, All that remained was the most important step, the refinement and integration process. Evan knew that simply injecting himself with raw mutant DNA would be suicidal. His body wasn't naturally designed to accommodate random genetic alterations. If the process wasn't perfect, he could suffer severe cellular rejection, neurological collapse, or uncontrolled mutation. To prevent this, he spent the next 72 hours in isolation, running simulations and conducting experiments to strip each gene sequence down to its purest, most efficient form. Each DNA strand was analyzed under high-powered microscopes, scanned for mutant genetic markers with unstable mutations. Unnecessary biological baggage was removed, flaws that would lead to harmful or inefficient mutations. Using data extracted from classified mutant enhancement projects, Evan developed an adaptive viral vector that would allow the new genes to integrate smoothly without rejection. This viral carrier, modeled after a perfected strain akin to the blacklight virus, would act as a binding agent, ensuring that each genetic enhancement fused perfectly with his existing DNA while continuously adapting and refining itself. When he was finally satisfied, Evan placed the modified genetic material into a final storage chamber. He had created the perfect foundation for his next step. Now, all that remained was to test it. Evan sat in the center of a reinforced containment chamber, a single syringe filled with the stabilized viral genetic serum in his hand. He had prepared for every possible contingency. The room was equipped with automatic sedatives, remote monitoring systems, and biocontainment measures in case of an adverse reaction. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was a complete biological metamorphosis. With a steady breath, he injected the viral serum into his arm. The reaction was immediate. A burning sensation spread through his veins, his body convulsing as the virus-laced genetic material forcibly merged with his own. His cells began restructuring at an unprecedented rate, his entire biological framework being rewritten from the inside out. His vision blurred, his hearing became distorted, and his nervous system overloaded, sending waves of painful electric shocks through his body. His muscles locked up, tendons stretching as if being forcibly reshaped. He could feel the very essence of his being shifting, transforming into something beyond human. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was as if his body was being broken down and rebuilt simultaneously. Minutes passed, then hours. His mind flickered between lucidity and unconsciousness, his awareness fading in and out as his body struggled to stabilize the process. There was no system assisting him. This was pure biological transformation, unassisted, uncontrolled. The virus within him was self-regulating, continuously optimizing his genetic structure. Then silence. When Evan finally regained consciousness, he found himself lying on the cold steel floor of the containment chamber, his body drenched in sweat. The first thing he noticed was the absence of pain. He sat up slowly, his movements smooth, effortless. His body felt light, unrestricted, as if he had shed an invisible weight that had been holding him back his entire life. He flexed his fingers, examining the subtle but undeniable changes. His skin appeared flawless, almost synthetic in its perfection. His senses had been amplified, his perception sharpened to a level beyond normal comprehension. Then came the real test. Evan moved toward a reinforced steel testing slab, gripping the edge experimentally. With minimal effort, he crushed the steel surface, his fingers sinking into the metal as if it were clay. His strength had tripled. He turned his gaze to the monitoring systems, running a full diagnostic on himself. The results flashed across the screen. Muscular density increased by 250%. Neural processing speed enhanced by 300%. Metabolic efficiency optimized to near-perfect levels. Genetic stability achieved and increased by 500%. That means he can add 5 more skills to his body without any side effects. His biological evolution had become self-sustaining. The modifications had worked. His genetic structure was no longer static. The viral strain within him was continuously refining itself, eliminating inefficiencies, and adapting to new conditions in real time. This was beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. He was no longer bound by the limitations of his previous self. Evan Mercer had evolved, and this was only the beginning. As Evan stepped out of the containment chamber, his mind was already racing ahead. This was phase 1, the foundation of his transformation. Now that his body was genetically optimized, he could begin the process of integrating additional passive abilities without fear of saturation. He walked toward the mirror installed on the far side of the room, his breath steady, his gaze sharp. As he caught his own reflection, he stopped. His hair, once dark, was now stark white, strands shimmering in the dim light, giving him an almost ethereal appearance. His eyes had shifted as well. The irises, once a deep hue, now glowed a piercing red, almost alive with intensity. The transformation had altered his body down to its very core. He no longer looked like the man he once was. His skin held an unnatural smoothness, as if perfected by a force beyond natural selection. It was as if his body had reshaped itself to maximize efficiency and aesthetic perfection. He looked both inhuman and divine, a being that had stepped beyond human evolution and into something new entirely. Even his stance felt different. His balance was effortless, his weight perfectly distributed, as if his body had calculated the optimal posture for every movement. His mere presence radiated precision, an aura of control power. His transformation wasn't grotesque or monstrous. It was something far more unsettling. He was no longer simply enhanced. He had become something beyond human comprehension. The world would soon see what true evolution looked like, and he would be its architect. Evan's fingers moved over the console, his mind far from the data before him. His thoughts were on something far more pressing, formulating a method to push his evolution further. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the true beginning of his invincibility. His latest acquisitions were 2 potent abilities harvested from rogue mutants. Both were impressive but deeply flawed, requiring conscious activation, making them inefficient for his purposes. Energy absorption was originally possessed by Soul Drain, allowing the passive intake of ambient kinetic, thermal, and electrical energy. However, in its original state, the energy had to be manually converted into usable strength. The process was slow and left the user vulnerable to sudden attacks. Energy manipulation was acquired from a defector of a secret government program, allowing the external release of absorbed energy, but it lacked any internal conversion mechanisms. The original user could expel forceful bursts of energy, but could not enhance themselves. Both abilities had fundamental issues. They required conscious activation, meaning they could not operate in the background. Energy storage was inefficient, leading to diminishing returns over time. Worse, excessive energy intake could result in system overload, rendering the user immobile or even leading to self-destruction. Evan's goal was to eliminate these limitations, merge both abilities into a single passive function, and optimize them at a cellular level. Unlike traditional genetic engineering, which relied on retroviral transduction, Evan had something superior. His personal strain of the blacklight virus, a revolutionary construct functioning as both an adaptive mutagen and an organic nanomachine network. Using CRISPR-based nanomachines, he isolated the mutant alleles responsible for energy absorption and manipulation. He mapped the specific expression regions controlling energy intake, distribution, and release. Most mutant genes contained regulatory elements that restricted their full potential, an evolutionary safeguard against overuse. Evan removed these biological inhibitors, ensuring his power functioned autonomously without conscious input. Instead of storing energy in isolated cells, he reprogrammed his mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, to function as organic batteries. Every cell in his body would now passively absorb energy from the environment, automatically reinforcing muscular strength, durability, and metabolic efficiency without effort. Satisfied, Evan activated the retroviral injection system, releasing the modified blacklight virus into his bloodstream. As the virus rewrote his genetic code, a notification appeared on his system interface. New passive ability detected. Initiating passive development. His vision darkened momentarily as a surge of energy pulsed through him. His body shuddered violently, muscles tensing as his cells adapted to the influx of power. Level 1. Passive energy storage current. Mitochondria begin absorbing ambient kinetic, thermal, and electrical energy. Energy automatically enhances strength, endurance, and reaction speed. Energy absorption efficiency, 10%. Level 2. Metabolic conversion enhancement. Available in 1 day. Excess energy is redirected into muscle growth and cellular fortification. Organic tissues develop resistance to shock, concussive force, and extreme temperatures. Energy absorption efficiency, 50%. Level 3. Regenerative energy loop. Available in 1 week. Stored energy fuels accelerated cellular repair, granting minor regenerative properties. Energy absorption efficiency, 90%. Level 4. Bioelectric enhancement. Available in 1 month. Neurons function at hyperefficiency, drastically improving reaction speed and sensory perception. Muscular contractions become energy-assisted, doubling baseline strength. Energy absorption efficiency, 100%. Level 5. Perpetual absorption field. Available in 1 year. Evan's body continuously draws energy from everything around him, ensuring he never tires. Near invulnerability to kinetic force, energy attacks, and temperature extremes. Regeneration reaches a state where even near-fatal injuries heal within minutes. Evan exhaled, feeling the subtle hum of stored energy circulating within his body. It was not yet at its peak, but with time, he would reach true invincibility. However, even energy adaptation was not enough. Invincibility required an absolute safeguard: regeneration. At first glance, one might assume that energy absorption's regenerative loop was sufficient. But this was a flawed assumption. The ability to heal using stored energy came with an inherent weakness. If he exhausted his reserves or found himself in an environment devoid of absorbable energy, his regenerative capabilities would cease. Furthermore, energy adaptation prioritized efficiency. If his body determined that absorbing energy for durability was more beneficial than healing at that moment, his survival could still be compromised. Evan needed a fail-safe, a biological safeguard that functioned independently of his energy reserves. True regeneration had to be a fundamental part of his biology, not something contingent on external factors. He had acquired a tissue sample from a mutant known as Scalebane, whose accelerated healing factor allowed him to regrow limbs within hours. While impressive, it was inefficient, functioning in bursts rather than maintaining a continuous repair system. Evan optimized it. Rather than sudden healing surges, his system would permanently repair minor cellular damage, drastically slowing aging and making wounds heal near instantly. He integrated nucleotide correction enzymes, preventing genetic degradation and eliminating risks of cancer or uncontrolled mutations. His regenerative system was designed with adaptive healing thresholds, allowing it to adjust based on available resources. If he had high energy reserves, healing would accelerate exponentially. If reserves were low, healing would still function at a slower but guaranteed rate. As he finalized the integration, another system notification appeared. New ability acquired. Regeneration. Level 1. Baseline healing current. Small cuts heal within seconds. Level 2. Muscle regeneration. Available in 1 day. Torn muscle fibers instantly rebuild, allowing indefinite physical exertion. Level 3. Organ repair. Available in 1 week. Internal organ damage automatically repairs within minutes. Level 4. Bone and nerve restoration. Available in 1 month. Even severed limbs regenerate over time. Level 5. Near immortality. Available in 1 year. Unless completely destroyed, his body will always regenerate. With his body becoming an unbreakable force, there was only one remaining vulnerability: his mind. Psychic threats like Charles Xavier and Jean Grey could potentially infiltrate his thoughts. He needed a mental barrier strong enough to resist even Omega-level telepaths. His plan was already forming. Neural encryption would create constant electromagnetic noise to disrupt external mind reading. Cognitive layering would separate surface thoughts from deeper intentions, ensuring even if someone managed to peek inside, they would only see what he wanted them to see. Bioelectric feedback loops would disrupt invasive psychic probes by interfering with brainwave synchronization. However, while he had the blueprint for this defense, he needed something more: a natural resistance. Some mutants had inherent immunity to psychic intrusion, and Evan knew exactly where to find the best candidate. He pulled up a display, scanning through known Omega-level telepaths, beings capable of shattering minds with a mere thought. After a moment, he smirked. If I'm going to safeguard my mind, I need the best, and I know exactly where to find her. The screen zoomed in, revealing the image of a beautiful yet dangerous woman, a mutant with diamond-hard skin and one of the most powerful telepathic minds on the planet. Emma Frost, the White Queen. Evan sat in his underground lab, methodically analyzing the data on his screens. His enhancements had reached new heights, but numbers on a display meant nothing if he couldn't test their real-world effectiveness. With his energy absorption now at level 2, adaptive evolution at level 4, and regeneration at level 2, he needed to push himself to understand the full extent of his abilities. He stepped into the reinforced testing chamber, an isolated section of his facility outfitted with state-of-the-art equipment, advanced monitoring systems, and controlled hazard simulations. Here, he would not hold back. His first objective was energy absorption and adaptive evolution. He set the system to simulate increasing kinetic force, starting at the level of an average human punch and scaling upward in intensity. The first strike landed against his body, a controlled mechanical impact of 250 pounds of force. Evan barely felt it. The system increased the force to 500 pounds, equivalent to a heavyweight boxer's punch. His body automatically distributed the energy across his muscle fibers, absorbing the impact effortlessly. He cranked it up. At 1,500 pounds, enough to fracture bones in a normal human, Evan felt a mild vibration in his muscles. At 3,000 pounds, his body hardened, instinctively reinforcing itself before the blow could cause any damage. He frowned. By the time he pushed the impact force to 5,000 pounds, enough to dent steel, his energy absorption kicked in at full effect. The moment his skin made contact with the force, his body converted the kinetic energy into stored power, reinforcing his physique even further. He exhaled sharply. "This isn't even a test," he muttered. He upped the intensity to 15,000 pounds, the equivalent of getting hit by a speeding car. The result was the same. His body absorbed the force, redistributed it, and left him unharmed. The final test: 50,000 pounds of force. The chamber's reinforced mechanical arms slammed into his chest with devastating power. For a brief moment, he felt the shock, but energy absorption neutralized it instantly, and adaptive evolution hardened his muscle fibers before the impact even registered. He smirked. "I might actually be invincible." Next, he turned to regeneration, but a new problem presented itself. He couldn't test it. His body was too durable. Every time he tried to cut himself, his skin adapted before the blade could pierce. Every attempt at chemical damage resulted in instant neutralization. Even when he used high-powered lasers, his body absorbed the thermal energy and reinforced itself further. Evan clenched his fists, a mix of amusement and irritation surfacing. His regeneration was now a last resort, a trump card in case some unknown force ever managed to injure him. He didn't need to heal, because nothing could harm him in the first place. To push the test further, he activated the hazard simulations, subjecting himself to conditions that would kill normal humans instantly. Extreme temperatures, ranging from -200 degrees Celsius to 1,500 degrees Celsius, had no effect. His body either absorbed the heat or adapted to the cold instantly. Oxygen deprivation. After shutting off the air supply, His metabolism slowed autonomously, reducing his oxygen requirements to near zero. High-pressure environments. Even at the equivalent of 10,000 meters underwater, his bones and organs reinforced against the external force. No matter what he threw at himself, he remained unscathed. He had achieved something far beyond superhuman. His body was a living, self-improving engine, fueled by any energy it encountered. Stepping out of the chamber, he smirked. If this keeps up, I won't even need to breathe. With his personal upgrades fully tested, Evan turned to his next project, superhuman enhancement for others. He had no intention of creating anyone even remotely close to his level. The moment someone became too powerful, they stopped being a customer and started being a threat. That was why the serum had to be perfectly flawed, strong enough to be valuable, but dependent enough to ensure continued loyalty. Amelia stood near the containment unit, watching the shimmering blue liquid inside the reinforced vials. "You've been working on this for days," she noted, arms crossed. "I still don't see why you care about making something weaker than yourself." Evan didn't look away from the screen. "Because power without control is a liability." She smirked. "You mean you don't want anyone catching up to you?" "Exactly." Amelia tilted her head. "Why even bother with human enhancements? Even enhanced humans are still inferior to high-level mutants." Evan finally turned to her. "Power isn't about raw strength. It's about dependency. If I provide the only stable enhancement solution, then anyone who wants to be on the same level as mutants will have no choice but to come to me." She considered his words. "That's why you're making it temporary." Evan nodded. "A 5-year window. Long enough to be useful, but not permanent enough to make them independent. If they don't take another dose after 5 years, their enhancements gradually fade. Their bones won't snap overnight, but they'll start feeling weaker, slower. They'll become addicted to their own power, and I'll be their only supplier." Amelia smirked. "Smart. You're making them buy into their own necessity." Evan gestured toward the screen. "And the price ensures that only the most elite individuals or organizations can afford it. 50 million per dose." She let out a soft whistle. "That's an absurd price." "Only for those who aren't desperate enough," Evan replied. "Governments, black market elites, private military forces, they'll all pay whatever it takes to remain competitive." Amelia leaned against the containment glass. "So what exactly does the serum do?" Evan displayed the biochemical pathway diagrams, showing the chain of modifications he had made. Effects of the super soldier serum: weakened version. Enhanced strength. Maximum strength increased by 300%, making the recipient as strong as 5 peak condition humans. Reflex and agility boost. Neural pathways optimized to increase reaction time by 5-fold, allowing soldiers to dodge bullets at close range. Metabolic optimization. Enhances endurance and energy efficiency, allowing a soldier to operate at peak condition for 72 hours before requiring rest. Enhanced durability. Bones reinforced to withstand high-impact trauma, reducing fractures by 80%. Regenerative factor limited. Minor wounds heal 5 times faster than normal, but no high-tier regeneration. Cognitive acceleration. Improved mental processing speed, situational awareness, and decision-making. As Evan finalized the first release, a new system notification appeared. Energy absorption has reached level 3. Regenerative energy loop activated. Stored energy can now be converted into automatic healing, accelerating regeneration beyond normal limits. Passive energy absorption efficiency increased to 90%. Regeneration has reached level 3. Organ repair activated. Internal damage will automatically heal in minutes, even with life-threatening injuries. Evan smirked, closing the interface. "This is going to reshape warfare," he murmured. "Every nation, every elite force, every underground organization, they're all going to want this." Amelia gave him a knowing look. "And who's going to be your first buyer?" Evan smirked. "Whoever's desperate enough to make the first move." With that, he finalized the first release of the serum, setting the stage for a global shift in power. Evan sat in his underground lab, methodically analyzing the data on his screens. His enhancements had reached new heights. But numbers on a display meant nothing if he couldn't test their real-world effectiveness. The 6-month deadline given by the general still loomed over him, but rushing things wasn't an option. If he released the super soldier serum too early, it would disrupt the balance and alert powerful forces, the same forces that would rather eliminate the source than negotiate. For now, he had to wait and plan. Amelia sat nearby, casually scrolling through her own interface, pretending not to observe him. She had been with him long enough to recognize the subtle signs when Evan was deep in thought. His eyes became sharper, his fingers tapped lightly against the console, and most importantly, he didn't speak unless necessary. She finally broke the silence. "You're hesitating." Evan glanced at her. "No, I'm calculating." She smirked. "Same thing in your case." Evan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "If I release the serum now, it sets off alarms. There's a delicate balance in the underground market. The moment someone gains too much power too quickly, everyone else starts panicking. Governments, criminal organizations, intelligence agencies, they'll all come crashing down at once." Amelia nodded, processing his words. "So you want to wait? But how long?" "Long enough for the inevitable paranoia to subside. If I move too soon, someone will get too curious and try to preemptively remove me. It's not about who buys first. It's about who will keep buying without questioning me." Amelia tilted her head, intrigued. "And you think waiting a few months will solve that?" Evan smirked. "Not entirely, but it give me time to set controlled expectations." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" He turned his screen toward her, revealing a series of fake market movements he had started manipulating. It was disinformation, carefully placed rumors, and artificial black market dealings, hinting at a competing enhancement serum that was supposedly in early development. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "You're making it look like someone else is already working on a serum?" Evan nodded. "If the world thinks someone else is still struggling with prototype stage enhancements, then my eventual reveal won't seem sudden or unnatural. It will look like I was just another player who figured it out a little faster." She grinned, clearly impressed. "So when you finally drop it, everyone will just assume you had a head start, instead of seeing you as the biggest anomaly." "Exactly," Evan confirmed. "By the time I introduce the real serum, they'll already expect something like it to exist. That keeps me from standing out too much." Amelia smirked. "You know, for someone who's practically a walking god, you really don't like being in the spotlight." Evan shrugged. "It's easier to control things from the shadows. The moment you're the center of attention, you lose maneuverability." Amelia leaned back against the table, watching him. "So if you're delaying the serum, what are you doing in the meantime?" His expression darkened slightly. "X-Corp." She frowned. "Still hung up on them?" "They've been too quiet," Evan muttered. "They disappeared after their last failed mutant experiment, but that doesn't mean they've stopped. Organizations like that don't just give up." Amelia crossed her arms. "So what's the plan?" Evan tapped on his screen, pulling up classified reports and satellite images he had hacked from various sources. He pointed to a research facility on the outskirts of New York, surrounded by high-security perimeters and hidden defenses. "They're still running something. They just moved it underground, literally." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not just a lab. That's a fortress." "Exactly. And the only reason to bury your research that deep is if it's something that shouldn't be found." Amelia pursed her lips. "What's in there?" Evan's fingers glided across the interface, pulling up incomplete files, corrupted reports, and glitched-out blueprints. Whatever X-Corp was working on, someone had tried to erase all traces of it. He finally spoke. "If I had to guess, something worse than their last experiment." Amelia sighed. "You're going to break in, aren't you?" Evan smirked. "I haven't decided yet, but I'm going to find out what they're hiding." Amelia studied him for a moment before rolling her eyes. "You're insane. I prefer meticulously prepared," Evan corrected. She shook her head, standing up. "You know, for all your planning and schemes, I don't think I've ever seen you actually relax." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Relaxation is inefficient." Amelia gave him a skeptical look. "Bullshit. Even machines need cooldowns. You might be superhuman, but your mind still operates on human psychology, which means at some point you need to step back." Evan chuckled. "You think I need a vacation?" She shrugged. "No. I think you need a break that isn't tied to world domination. He smirked. And what do you suggest? Amelia tapped her chin playfully. Something simple. Something that doesn't involve you rewriting the balance of power. Evan leaned back, thinking, fine, I'll humor you. What's your idea? She grinned. How about dinner? He blinked. Dinner? Yeah, normal human interaction. You sit, you eat, and you pretend not to be an all-powerful mutant overlord for one evening. Evan stared at her, unimpressed. That sounds ridiculous. Amelia smirked. Which is exactly why you should do it. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Fine, one dinner. But if anything about this feels forced, I'm leaving. She held up her hands. Fair enough. Evan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. This is a waste of time. Amelia grinned. No, this is what normal people do. Try it sometime, you might not hate it. Evan watched as she walked toward the exit, still skeptical but mildly amused. Amelia was one of the few people who challenged him without being a threat. For once, he decided to let someone else lead the plan. For now, Evan stared at the screen in his lab, but his mind wasn't on the data. It was focused on a more unusual problem, dinner. Amelia had somehow convinced him to step out of his comfort zone, and now here he was on the brink of something completely out of his typical routines. The idea of a normal evening wasn't something Evan had ever entertained. He was a man of logic, strategy, and control. Everything in his world had a clear purpose, a calculated step toward either gaining more power or perfecting his abilities. But here he was, getting ready for something that didn't involve systems or missions. He had no idea what to expect from this evening, but it was clear that Amelia was taking this seriously. As he walked out his lab, he felt something strange, anticipation. Not for the food itself, but for the dynamics between him and Amelia. Amelia was already waiting near the entrance, dressed in something simple yet elegant, a soft, dark blue dress that accentuated her figure without being overly flashy. It wasn't revealing, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made it impossible to ignore. Ready for your break from world domination? She teased, a playful smile on her lips. Evan couldn't help but smirk. I suppose I'll indulge you for tonight. Don't expect me to make a habit of it. She raised an eyebrow. Sure, you'll go back to your usual routine after. But tonight you're going to be just a guy who's out to have dinner. Dinner, right. He couldn't help but feel his curiosity grow. So, where exactly are we going? Amelia didn't answer right away, leading him out of his underground lair and toward a car she'd arranged for them. They didn't talk much during the ride, but Evan couldn't ignore the underlying tension in the air. There was something about her presence that unsettled him in an oddly exciting way. It wasn't just because of her intellect or the way she always kept him on his toes. No, this felt like something more, a strange sense of intrigue he couldn't fully explain, or perhaps just control slipping from his grasp. The car stopped outside a quiet, upscale restaurant, a low-key yet classy place, with soft lights casting shadows across the neatly set tables. The environment was calm and welcoming, but Evan's sharp eyes picked up on every detail. He was no stranger to high-end establishments, but this one felt different. The air was light, the chatter of guests quiet and comfortable, and everything around him felt disconnected from his usual world of power and manipulation. Amelia stepped out first, and Evan followed her inside, trying his best to seem at ease. They were led to a table by the window, where the soft glow of the city lights outside provided a serene atmosphere. Once seated, Amelia smiled at him. So, tell me, Evan, what's it like being so untouchable? Evan leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. There was something about the way she spoke that made it impossible to resist. The challenge, the allure. She wasn't asking him about his powers or his ambitions. She was asking about something far more personal. I suppose, he began slowly, being untouchable means you don't have to worry about the usual things. Like other people getting in your way. She tilted her head, her eyes glinting with curiosity. Is that really all it is? Just power and control? He met her gaze without hesitation. Power is more than just control. It's about freedom, freedom to do whatever I want whenever I want. It's about shaping the world to suit my needs. Amelia's lips curled into a knowing smile. You sound more like a king than a man, Evan. Evan didn't reply immediately. There was truth to her words. His long-term goals had always revolved around absolute dominance. But tonight, the weight of his ambitions felt slightly lighter. Amelia wasn't just another person to manipulate or control. She was something different. The evening wasn't about strategy. It was about something that felt more human, more personal. They placed their orders, and, as the waiter left, Evan leaned forward slightly. You still haven't told me what this is all about, Amelia. You don't strike me as the type to enjoy small talk. She chuckled, but there was a definite glint of mischief in her eyes. Maybe I'm just curious, Evan. You're so used to being in charge. I wanted to see if you could step back and just be normal for once. You're still just a man, after all. Evan couldn't help but study her. Her playful demeanor seemed so at odds with the sharp, calculating side of her that he'd grown accustomed to. Was this really about dinner? Or was there more behind her actions tonight? As the conversation continued, something subtle shifted in the air between them. Their words became less guarded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Evan felt the weight of his position as a ruler and strategist slip away, replaced by something far more intriguing. Amelia was no longer just his assistant or someone to manipulate. She was becoming something else, someone who could keep up with him mentally, and perhaps in ways he wasn't yet willing to admit, someone who was slowly breaking down the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself. As the meal progressed, Evan found himself eagerly anticipating the moments when their eyes would meet across the table, when their conversation would veer into deeper territory, as if there was a dance happening between them, subtle but powerful. There was no denying it. He was drawn to her. There was something intoxicating about her presence, the way she balanced both intellect and charm. It felt like they were slowly starting to connect in a way that wasn't about power, but something far more personal. By the time the evening came to a close, there was a definite shift between them. He wasn't sure if it was the wine, the quiet atmosphere, or just the way Amelia had managed to get under his skin, but something was different. He found himself looking at her not just as an ally, but as a woman who might have more power over him than he ever intended to give. As they left the restaurant and walked back toward the car, their pace naturally slowed. There was tension now, something unspoken but undeniably present. So, Evan, Amelia said, breaking the silence, her voice lower than before, how does it feel to finally step out of your own little world and join the rest of us? Evan gave her a side glance, his mind racing with new thoughts. I suppose it's not as bad as I thought. Amelia's lips curved upward. You know, Evan, it's not all about control and strategy. Sometimes it's about letting go. He looked at her, realizing that there was more to her than just the brilliant mind and the sharp intellect he had always admired. Tonight, there was something else, something that made her stand out in a way that none of his other acquisitions ever had. They reached the car, and Evan opened the door for her, his thoughts still swirling. Amelia didn't immediately get in, though. She turned to face him, her eyes now intense in the low light. You know, she began softly, I've been thinking, maybe we should get to know each other better, on more than just a professional level. Evan's heart skipped a beat. His instincts told him to keep control, to maintain distance, but a different part of him desired something else, something he wasn't yet ready to admit. Maybe we should, he said, his voice low. As he closed the door behind them, the air between them felt thick with possibility. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but one thing was clear. The dance had just begun. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. Evan's eyes opened slowly, but his mind was already processing the events of the previous night. The lingering thoughts of Amelia were still there, but the practical side of him quickly took over. There was no time for lingering emotions. There were things to accomplish, new goals to reach. He was well aware of what had happened between them, but the night, the intimacy, all of it felt almost like a complication in the grand scheme of his plans. Still, Amelia had stayed with him, and while he hadn't expected the connection, the intensity of their night had disrupted the usual rhythm of his world. He didn't dwell on it long, though. The test of his abilities loomed over him. There were advancements to be made, improvements to ensure his position wasn't just secure, but unshakable. Amelia stirred beside him, her breath slow and steady as she remained in a deep slumber. Evan allowed himself a brief glance at her, wondering if this would affect their dynamic going forward. She had become a key part of his operations, but last night had undeniably shifted something between them. Would she become a weakness or a strength? He pushed the thought aside. Now wasn't the time for distraction. The following weeks passed in a blur of work and experiments. Every moment Evan spent perfecting his craft was another step toward further solidifying his power. His focus on his mind-shielding project consumed him. He was no longer just testing his ability to create mental defenses. He was improving them, making them impervious to even the most powerful telepathic attacks. His first model had been decent, but far from ideal. The basic structure had been laid out, but its reliance on external equipment and biofeedback systems meant it wasn't efficient enough to hold up against any serious threats. Evan delved deep into his neural encryption system, reprogramming it from the ground up. He began with bioelectric resistance fields, a method to disrupt telepathic waves by creating interference patterns that were untraceable. The process was complex, requiring multiple levels of subtle electromagnetic noise to scramble incoming signals without making the user detectable. Using his newly enhanced energy absorption, Evan also integrated bioelectric feedback loops, an improvement that would amplify the system's effectiveness by drawing on stored energy to maintain the mind shield at full power for longer periods. At the same time, he didn't neglect his adaptive evolution. His body had already become nearly invincible in terms of physical defense, but now he was focusing on using the energy from his environment to enhance his mental fortifications. The more energy he absorbed, the more he could draw from his internal battery to power his mind shield. This process took weeks, but by the end of the month, Evan's new mental shielding gadget was nothing short of impressive. The device, a sleek, compact unit that could be worn discreetly under clothing, was capable of shielding his mind from even the most invasive psychic probes. Meanwhile, Evan's two new abilities had also reached level 4 after rigorous testing and continuous enhancement. Energy absorption was now functioning at a level that transformed his ability to react. The absorption was so efficient that his body instantly converted stored energy into physical enhancements, boosting his strength, speed, and durability without him needing to consciously do anything. It happened passively, and the more energy his body absorbed from the environment, the stronger he became, amplifying his capabilities without even thinking about it. Regeneration, too, had evolved into something far more powerful. At level 4, it now allowed him to regrow entire limbs within a matter of minutes, working alongside his energy absorption. However, due to the nature of his passive abilities, Evan could not be harmed in any significant way. His body absorbed every impact, temperature change, or environmental stress without being injured. His adaptive evolution ensured that any force, be it physical or otherwise, was immediately absorbed and converted into increased strength, preventing any damage from reaching him. It was time for a final test to ensure his abilities were now flawless. He entered the testing chamber, a high-tech space filled with various equipment designed to simulate the most extreme conditions. His goal was to push his regeneration and energy absorption to their limits. He began with a simple impact test, subjecting himself to the same force levels that had previously been impossible to endure. This time, however, he didn't need to consciously absorb the energy. His body did it automatically, immediately feeding the impact into his system. Every attack was absorption, leaving no sign of damage at all. Next, he ran a simulation that included extreme temperatures and electrical surges, forces that would have incapacitated a normal human within seconds. But Evan, through his adaptive evolution, absorbed the kinetic and thermal energy, converting it into usable strength. The energy feedback loops were in full force, and his mind shield stayed active, preventing any external force from intruding. The results were clear. No harm, no damage. Evan smiled slightly to himself, a rare moment of satisfaction crossing his features. His body had reached a point of perfection, impervious to harm through a combination of energy absorption and adaptive evolution. There was no force, no impact, no environmental factor that could harm him now. After the tests, Evan stood in the center of the room, the air heavy with the scent of burned ozone and heated metal. His body was now a living weapon, and he had become something more than human, a new form of existence that no longer had to fear any conventional threat. As the adrenaline began to subside, Evan's thoughts drifted to Amelia No, who had been quietly observing his progress from the sidelines. Their interaction over the last month had been unpredictable, but she had proven to be more than just a capable assistant. She had been a constant in the shifting world Evan was creating. But as Amelia remained a steady presence, Evan knew he also needed to make her strong enough to face anything. He already had a perfect plan. The sterile smell of the laboratory was punctuated only by the occasional hum of the machines that surrounded them. Evan Mercer stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed in concentration as he watched Amelia adjust to the changes in her body. The energy absorption genes he'd injected into her system had already begun to take effect. Amelia's expression was a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She knew that Evan's work was often groundbreaking, but this was different. This wasn't just a power upgrade or an enhancement. This was something entirely new, even for him. "You're sure this will work?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with a hint of excitement. "Of course," Evan replied, his eyes scanning the readouts from the equipment that monitored her vitals. "Your body has already been altered by your mutation, but this gene will allow you to manipulate matter on molecular level. It will grant you control over your form and the world around you." A soft sigh escaped Amelia's lips as she flexed her fingers. Her skin shimmered for a moment, as if the air itself had thickened around her, then disappeared entirely. She was no longer solid. Her body had turned into vapor, barely distinguishable from the mist rising from a hot cup of tea. Evan observed her closely, his gaze appreciative. "That's it. You're already adapting faster than I expected." Amelia reappeared, her body reforming seamlessly as though she had never disappeared. "It feels strange, but I can control it," she said with a grin. She raised her hand, and a nearby chair floated toward her, lifted effortlessly by the vapor she had become. "It's like I'm not even here, but I still am." Evan nodded, his lips curling into a small smile. He had seen many mutants with extraordinary abilities, but Amelia's power was unlike any other. Not only could she transform herself into vapor, she could convert matter into mist at will. It wasn't just for evasion. She could manipulate the flow of vapor through the air, moving herself and others around, making her one of the most elusive and versatile fighters. Her powers also offered an edge in battle. She could easily avoid attacks by dispersing herself into mist or squeeze through the tightest spaces without a hint of resistance. Her body might dissolve in an instant, but in that moment of dispersion, she was virtually untouchable. Even more incredible was her ability to control the vapor's movement. She could pull objects to her or steal weapons from an opponent's hands, vaporizing them in the process. "I think I can use this for more than just evasion," Amelia murmured, considering the possibilities. Her eyes sparkled with an almost dangerous light. "If I can't be touched, nothing can stop me." "You'll need to be careful," Evan cautioned. "This ability has its limits. You can't vaporize everything, especially if there are complex structures or items that are resistant to your powers." Amelia smiled, the challenge only making her more eager to test her new abilities. "Don't worry, Evan. I'll take care of it." She leaned in a little closer, her eyes meeting his with a shared understanding. There was a quiet bond between them, something forged through long hours of research, shared moments of closeness, and silent promises. Their relationship had always been more than just professional. There were moments where their connection had deepened beyond words, moments where their intimacy wasn't just a byproduct of their shared work, but a natural extension of their trust in each other. Without breaking eye contact, Amelia shifted again, her form dissolving into vapor once more. This time, she floated gracefully to the far side of the lab, where she reformed with a flick of her wrist. Evan's smile remained, but it was filled with both pride and something deeper. You're ready to face anything. A few days passed. The morning light filtered into Evan's underground lab, casting long shadows against the walls. He stood by the console, reviewing the most recent set of data on the progress of the super soldier serum, all the while reflecting on the strategic balance he had been carefully crafting. His influence was steadily growing, too much for even his greatest competitors to ignore. Mercer Biotech had become a powerhouse, not just in medicine, but in shaping the world's future. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. However, the feeling was fleeting. He knew the world he was building was fragile, and with power came inevitable threats. His instincts were sharper than ever, and something in the air felt different today. Amelia entered the lab, her presence as commanding as always. But this time, her usual playful demeanor was replaced with a look of seriousness. "There's been a development," she said, her voice low. "Essex Corp is making a move, and it's not just business as usual." Evan's eyes narrowed. Essex Corp had always been a formidable adversary, but their failure to replicate the Vitali's R and Vitali's P formulas had pushed them to desperate measures. The serum's success had sent shockwaves through the pharmaceutical world, and now that Mercer Biotech controlled the future of medicine, Essex Corp had no choice but to act before they were rendered irrelevant. "Tell me everything," Evans said, his voice calm, but his mind already calculating the next move. Amelia flicked a few buttons on her tablet, pulling up an encrypted report. "We've intercepted chatter. Essex Corp has attempted several covert operations to replicate the formulas, but failed each time. They couldn't get their hands on the right genetic sequences. But now, they're planning something else." Evan's gaze sharpened. "Stealing it." "Exactly. They've sent a highly skilled team to infiltrate one of our storage facilities," she continued. "A team unlike any we've encountered before. This isn't just about stealing formula samples. It's about destabilizing us. They've already planted the seed that their own version of Vitali's could work better than ours." Evan clenched his jaw. He had known this day would come, the moment his success became a target. But the fact that Essex Corp had been backed into such a corner was a sign of their desperation. "What are they after?" Evan asked, his mind racing. "The full formula," Amelia answered. "They're going after everything. The raw data, the final variants, the test subjects. They know they can't replicate it, but they'll try to steal our progress and use it as leverage." Evan took a deep breath. Essex Corp was dangerous, but Mercer Biotech was no longer just a biotech company. It was a force in its own right. Their influence had expanded to a point where even Essex Corp couldn't act without consequence. Still, they were powerful, and a direct assault on one of his labs would be costly. "We won't let them have it," Evans said, standing from his chair. "I'll deal with this personally. We'll use their desperation against them." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You're going yourself?" "Of course. They're not going to expect a counterattack of this magnitude. We'll lead them into a trap." Hours later, Evan stood at the entrance of one of Mercer Biotech's most secure storage facilities, a location that housed not just the Vitali's R and Vitali's P formulas, but every piece of data and research crucial to their success. The facility was state-of-the-art, its defenses impenetrable to all but the most determined foes. Evan was aware of the risks. Essex Corp would never send their best team without ensuring they had all the intelligence they needed. They were making a statement. They thought they could breach the fortress, steal everything, and leave without a trace. They were wrong. The first sign that something was amiss came from the security feed. A team of intruders, heavily armed and wearing specialized suits, had breached the outer perimeter. They were moving quickly, their path already mapped out by the internal systems Evan had manipulated hours ago. They had no idea he was already several steps ahead. Amelia stood beside him, her expression focused. "They're in." Evan nodded, activating a remote security system. "Let's not give them the welcome they're expecting." The intruders moved silently through the shadows, their stealth suits blending into the darkness as they approached the data vaults. They were confident, too confident. But as they reached the central control room, their sense of security began to falter. The lights flickered once, then shut off entirely. "Something's wrong," one of the intruders muttered, his voice strained. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. The walls of the facility began to hum, their metal surfaces expanding and contracting as if alive. The intruders raised their weapons, scanning the environment, but before they could react, the walls opened up, revealing the true depth of the trap Evan had set. "You've been caught," Evan's voice echoed through the facility, amplified by the security system. The intruders froze, their eyes wide in disbelief. They had walked straight into an ambush. The entire facility had been rigged to respond to their every move, with automated defenses activated by Evan's code. Before they could respond, the floor beneath them shifted, sending them into a containment pit. A barrier shot up, trapping them in the center of the facility. The intruders scrambled, but it was too late. Amelia stood behind Evan, her expression calm. "They'll be taken care of. We've locked down all exits." Evan nodded, his gaze never leaving the trapped intruders. "Let them think they have an opportunity. They'll make the next move. And when they do, we'll strike." As the intruders tried in vain to escape, Evan's mind raced through his next set of moves. Essex Corp had underestimated him, but now they would realize just how far Mercer Biotech had come. His grip on the market and the future was unshakable. "They'll come back," Amelia remarked, watching the intruders struggle. "They will," Evan agreed. "But next time, they'll be facing a new version of Mercer Biotech, one they can't touch." The captured operatives from Essex Corp were soon extracted and interrogated, revealing the full extent of their mission: to steal the formulas and data that Evan had worked so hard to perfect. The formula for Vitali's R and Vitali's P was too valuable for them to let slip through their fingers, and their failure had cost them dearly. As Evan walked away from the interrogation room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Essex Corp had tried to steal from him, but they had underestimated the strength of Mercer Biotech's reach. The attack had failed, and Evan had already turned the tables on them. His influence was growing by the day, and soon, no one, no organization, no government would be able to stand in his way. Not even Essex Corp. "Make sure they never try this again," Evan said to one of his subordinates, his voice cold and commanding. "If they come for me again, they'll regret it." As the operatives were taken away, Evan's mind turned back to his ultimate goal. The world was his for the taking. But first, he would make sure that no one ever doubted his dominance again. Mercer Biotech was no longer just a company. It was a force, and no one, absolutely no one, was safe from its reach.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500-plus novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.